You're watching WSTV Digital Media.
Yeah, no.
We're just going to be quiet.
Oh, no, I got it.
He's giving you.
You ready? Good afternoon. Welcome to the April 11th, 2019 meeting of the City County Planning Board. Would you please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Today's meeting is being broadcast live on TV 13 and will be rebroadcast at 10 a.m. Friday morning and again at 4 p.m. Sunday afternoon. The one thing I wanted to do before we get into our action items is to publicly thank and honor our chair of 19 years, Mr. Arnold King. Most of you probably read the paper where he served for 19 years and made 420 straight meetings. And because of health, he had to resign. As I was walking here today, he texted me and said, break a leg. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I wanted to just allow the board to have some remarks. Some have worked with Arnold much longer than I have. So I'll start with Mr. Grubbs if anyone has anything to say, because he is watching and listening.
Yeah, no pressure. He told me this morning he was going to be watching this afternoon, so that didn't exactly make me comfortable. But I've known Arnold most of my adult life, and he's a dear friend and a mentor of mine, and he's certainly going to be missed. 420 meetings is just amazing. It's almost ridiculous how when you think how much dedication that takes, and his passion for planning and for good planning is going to be missed, and it's irreplaceable, quite frankly.
I'd just like to say that Arnold King has been a consummate professional to this team and to city planning, and while he will be sorely missed, he will never be forgotten. And I remember my first day on the planning board, and his advice to me was absolutely invaluable and still is today. And it's difficult to look that way and not see him sitting there today, as I believe it may be for some of you even sitting in the audience and have been to one of these sessions before. So we want to say hats off to Mr. Arnold King and thank you for your undying and devoted service to the city of Winston-Salem.
Yeah, it's been real good getting to know Arnold at this meeting, not only here in what he's interested in with planning, but his personal life as well, and what he's been involved with in the community and the various honors that he's gotten over the years. Chris, I'm a little bit worried. Arnold enjoyed a swift meeting, and I'm keeping an eye on you.
I, like Jason, have known Arnold for a bunch of years. Not the majority of my adult life, because I'm a whole lot older than Jason is. But Arnold is really epitomizes public service. He's just not only represented his town, Kernersville, where I reside. Well, he's known as Mr. Kernersville over there on that side of the county. But he's done so many things. He's been on so many boards. He's given so much of his time away just for the development of Forsyth County, Winston-Salem, as well as the other municipalities inside the county. But beyond those kinds of things, and I'll also mention the Triad even. He served as a leader in Triad efforts, in Guilford County and Forsyth County. But he's just, he's a good guy. He is really tries in a mannerly way. I noticed a comment that Melinda said the other day, that he just handles himself in a professional but mannerly way. respects other people's opinions, and provides good leadership. And Arnold, we will be praying for you and for you to have peace and comfort, and we will absolutely miss you. But we also we appreciate you preparing us with a new good leader for this group. Thank you, Arnold.
I just wanted to thank Arnold for his kind treatment of me since I've been on the board, and I really do appreciate his approach and his efficiency and the way he conducted the meetings, and I'm sure that we will aspire to continue that as we go forward.
It's hard to think of sitting here without Arnold there with doing that. I was thinking that all the way in today, but just to repeat the theme of what has been working with Arnold professionally and getting to know him personally, as far as just the ultimate human being, I guess is the best way to describe that. Always available with professional opinions, always looking for a fair resolution to issues for the best outcome for everybody involved. And that's just such an example that there's no other one like him, and it's been an honor to work with him for a lot of years now. So thank you, Arnold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the world of Arnold. He has been the only chair I've had since I've been with this department, and I am very appreciative of everything that he has done for our department and for this board and for the planning efforts in Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. I am most appreciative of how respectful he has been of staff for this entire time, how appreciative he has been of our work. That means the world to our staff. So I can't say thank you enough. And like Jason mentioned, his record of public service is unmatched, and it's really incredible when you stop and think about it. So just a big thank you to Arnold for all that he has done, and again, we're praying for him and thinking about him. So thank you.
Thank you.
18 years I've been here, and this is the first meeting I've been to when Arnold hasn't been here. So again, thanking and praying for you, Arnold.
Arnold, again, thank you for your service and your loyalty and your servant leadership in the city. You did it gracefully and humbly, and I'm glad that you're still here to hear everything that we're saying. A lot of times we say things when people can't hear, but you can hear the sincere gratitude that we have in our hearts. So thank you so very kindly. Let's give Arnold All right. Our first order of business today will be the consent agenda. These are items for which the petitioner is requesting withdrawal or continuance, or items for which staff has recommended approval and no one has signed up to speak in opposition. For all public hearings, each side has a total of 12 minutes. There is no rebuttal period. Once the public hearing is closed and the board goes into work session, no one is permitted to speak unless a planning board member asks them a question. For general use district zoning requests, the planning board must consider the full range of uses allowed in the zoning district being requested. The petitioner may not refer to a specific use for the property. For special use district zoning requests, however, the petitioner must identify the intended use or uses of the site and give specific details on how the site will be developed. Items under Section B of the agenda will require final action by the appropriate elected body, either the city council or the county commissioners. As such, votes taken by the planning board concerning these items are recommendations that will be considered by the elected bodies during their review of the requests. Before addressing the planning board, we will need your name, address, and zip code for the record. Our first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the March 14th and March 28th meetings. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Lamb and seconded by Mr. Grubbs. Any further discussion? Those in favor? Opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you. Mr. Corley, I'll now turn it over to you for the consent agenda.
Thank you, Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have a number of items on the consent agenda this evening. We have a number of items on the agenda period this evening. This is the largest agenda we've had in a while, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with the first item. B1 is F1582. This is also called Big Bargain Storage. It's a special use rezoning request to rezone property from RS9 to GBS for storage services retail. It's about 1.5 acres on the southeast side of Ebert Road, just south of the intersection with West Clemensville Road. That case has been continued so that the applicant can meet UDO requirements. When we gave them our feedback at the interdepartmental review meeting, they went back, made some changes, enlarged their site, and because their request changed, they have to bring a new request before the board next month. So that one will be heard in May. Next item on the consent agenda is B2 W3397, which is Oliver's Trace. This is a site plan amendment for apartments in RM8S zoning district. This one has been continued from February and March. The applicant has submitted another request for continuance, and due to some tricky calendar dates, the applicant gets another automatic continuance according to the planning board's bylaws. But the next time this case comes before the board, it will have to be heard because the board has to give a recommendation to the city council within 120 days of the request date.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Is that all right?
Yes.
Are you informing the people that are interested in this case about these continuances and the potential of further continuances and whatnot?
We are.
Okay.
This is the third continuance, correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And the last one.
Thank you.
The next item on the consent agenda is B3W3402. This is a request to rezone property from HBS to HBL, 2.41 acres on the north side of Country Club Road across from Southwind Drive. This case was continued from the March hearing so that the applicant could change their request from, originally the applicant had requested a, I believe it was a site plan amendment for the HBS property, but then they changed their request to rezoning to HBL without a site plan. Here is a photo of the property standing at the corner of Southwind Drive looking across the street. This is the subject property, and if you can see my cursor, the property goes all the way down to where this building is. This building is actually on the subject property. The area plan recommends commercial use for this site. Staff sees that as consistent with everything in the area plan's recommendations, and so we recommend approval of this request.
Any questions for staff at this point? All right, we do have one proponent who wants to speak. Are they allowed to speak now, or do I need to pull it off?
Mr. Chairman, typically what we have done is if there's any opposition, we bring them up and let them speak at this point. But typically, unless there's something you want to ask the proponent, we haven't done that in the past.
Okay. All right, no one has signed up in opposition. Is there anyone here opposed to this request? Seeing none, I declare the public hearing closed.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, moved by Mr. Lamb and seconded by Mr. Grubbs. Is there all those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Unanimously passed.
The next item on the agenda is B4 W3404. This is the Grand at Union Cross, which was continued from the March meeting. This is two requests bundled into one staff report. The first request is for a final development plan approval for property that was already zoned in docket W3116. And then the second part of this request is to rezone property from RM12S to RM18S. This property is on the west side of Union Cross Road at the intersection with Solomon Drive. Here is a photo of the property on Solomon Drive. This is a photo of the property looking into it northward on Pecan Lane. This is a photo of the intersection of Solomon Drive and Union Cross Road, which was studied the first time this plan came through. And in a traffic impact analysis, a lot of recommendations were made. We've had numerous discussions with the applicant and with the State Department of Transportation and with our City Department of Transportation about what improvements are required before this project can move forward. And then this is a photo of Solomon Drive, which is the subject of those discussions. We'll get into that a little bit later. So here's the approved site plan, which was W3158. This thick yellow line is the zoning line. On the right of the zoning line is property currently zoned GBS, and that's where the applicant is requesting final development plan approval only. And on the left of the yellow line is property currently zoned RM12S, and that is where the applicant is requesting rezoning to RM18S. I have tried, and I don't know how well you can see it, I've tried to let you know which buildings were proposed for which heights. On the initial proposal, the buildings outlined in red are 4-story buildings. The ones in blue are 3-story buildings, and the ones in green are 2-story buildings. The applicant's changes include pretty much making most of the buildings 3 stories, leaving 2-story buildings on either corner of the property, as you can see in this proposed site plan. The zoning line remains the same. The applicant is just requesting to change the RM12S portion to RM18S and then get the whole plan approved as a final development plan for the W3116.
Thank you.
So here's a little information for you to show which buildings went from what size to what size. These are buildings that changed from 4 stories to 3 stories. These are buildings that went from 2 to 3. So you can see that buildings adjacent to single-family residential behind this property, where my cursor is, have increased in height. And then the reason why the applicant has to request a more intense zoning, or not a more intense zoning district, but a zoning district that allows more density, is because 24 of the units shifted from the GBS portion to the RM12S portion. It pushed their overall density in that portion of the site up to around 15 units per acre. So they have to request the next level of multifamily residential zoning. These are the elevations that were submitted with this request. They are a little bit different from the ones that were originally approved. They use a higher quality of building material. So you should be able to see brick on the lower portion of the building, and these upper portions use hardy board. Oh, I'm sorry. These are the original elevations, and these are the new ones. So they use more brick and hardy board. Essentially, this request, or the area plan, recommended intermediate residential use of the site on the RM12S portion and commercial for the GBS portion. Nothing about the proposed layout of the site is different other than the height of the buildings. So staff sees this as consistent with the area plan and the previously approved site plan and recommends approval of the request. We had to make some additional conditions, or we had to make some changes to the conditions that you have in your agenda book. The condition here in bold was originally stated to require the applicant to obtain a driveway permit from both the state and the city. They don't need a driveway permit from the state, only from the city, but they do need an encroachment agreement to do work in the state's right-of-way, which is Union Cross Road. That work includes milling and repaving and restriping on Union Cross Road to add an additional left turn lane from Union Cross Road onto Solomon Drive, and then mill work, paving, and striping onto Solomon Drive for a left turn lane onto Pecan Lane. And if it's hard for you to visualize that, I can go back to the site plan so you can look at it. We also have a condition in here that limits the signage on the property to one freestanding monument sign, the maximum height of 6 feet and 36 square feet in copy. And then because this is a final development plan coupled with a rezoning, the final development plan wouldn't work unless the rezoning was approved. City Council has to approve the rezoning, so we've added a condition of approval that says the final development plan is only approved or only takes effect if rezoning is approved by the approval authority, which is the city council.
Thank you. Yep.
So, did the number of occupants change with the heights? It just
No.
all evened out
The
the way it
total
was?
number of units is exactly the same. It's just the heights of the buildings were adjusted, and some of those buildings that got taller were on the RM12S portion of the site.
Mr. Chairman, I need to be excused from the discussion and vote on this.
All right, thank you. No one has signed up. Is anyone here in opposition? Seeing no one, I declare the public hearing closed.
Before we start, we'll need two motions on this: approval of the final development plan, and then a recommendation on the rezoning. So it'll be two actions.
Okay.
All right, so you need the rezoning first?
Whichever order you want to take those in.
Okay, but you want two different motions?
Correct.
By motion. All right, I move that we approve the request for the rezoning.
Motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second?
A second.
Second by Ms. Smith. All those in favor? Opposed, the same side? That passes unanimously. Second?
I move that we approve the
Final
Right.
development plan.
final development plan. Yep, I move that we approve the final development plan.
Motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Hitz. All those in favor, sign of aye. Thank you. Passes unanimously. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the next item on the consent agenda is B5W3405, which is a special use rezoning request to change the zoning of this subject property from RS9 to RM12S. The property is 4.8 acres on the south side of Kester Mill Road, west of Jonestown Road. Here's a photo of the subject property on the south side of Kester Mill Road. So if you're driving west on Kester Mill Road, the property is going to be to your left. And then here's another photo looking further to the left. Again, the subject property is on the left. And then this is flipping around 180 and looking at the property, or looking down Kester Mill Road toward Jonestown Road, which is here in the background. You can see that on the right is Tatton Park, which is a multifamily residential community adjacent to the subject property on its eastern boundary. This is the site plan that was proposed with W3405. It includes two apartment buildings up against the eastern property boundary, which again is shared with the Tatton Park development, and a clubhouse building on the other side of the internal access drive and parking lot, and then a stormwater management device down in the southwest corner. There is a stream that runs through the southern portion of the site, which you can see in the blue line here. These are the proposed elevations submitted by the applicant. These are elevations for the apartment buildings. And these are elevations for the clubhouse building. The area plan, the Southwest Suburban Area Plan, recommends intermediate density residential use of the property that can go up to 18 dwelling units per acre. The applicant is requesting up to 12 with this request and a special use site plan. Staff sees the request as consistent with the area plan, meeting all UDO requirements for the site plan, and we recommend approval of this request.
No one has signed up to speak. Is anyone here opposed to this request? Seeing none, I declare the public hearing closed.
Move approval.
Motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Grubb. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Passes unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next item on the consent agenda is B6W3406, which is a request to rezone property from CIS to CI, which is a general use district downtown. The property is about 3 1/3 acres, and it is kitty corner from this building on the northeast corner of Church Street and First Street. So if you are standing at the front door of this building and you turn around looking towards City Hall, across on the right is where this property is, and it's that entire block. You can see that it is essentially 2 parking lots with a parking deck bisecting the block. And this is a photo of the site. As I said, if you're standing at this building on the ground floor, you just look across the street, and that's the subject property. This is a view of the subject property from the Forsyth County Government Center. Again, it's a parking deck in the middle of 2 parking lots. Staff thinks that the request provides more design flexibility without a special use site plan. The downtown plan the downtown plan recommends mixed uses for the site as it does for most of downtown. Staff sees this request as consistent with all applicable plans, and we recommend approval of this request.
No one has signed up to speak. Is anyone here opposed to this request? Seeing no one, I declare the public hearing closed. Motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Grubbs. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Passes unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item on the consent agenda is B7, W3407, which is a request to rezone property from GI and GO to GBL, which is General Business Limited Use. The site is a little under 20 acres on the north side of Reynolds Boulevard, west of Indiana Avenue. It's not quite the intersection because there's a railroad that intervenes between Indiana Avenue and the subject property. Here's a photo of the site looking east on Reynolds Boulevard. These 2 buildings are existing, and they are on the National Register of Historic Places. Here's a view of the site, which is on the right, looking west on Reynolds Boulevard. You can see across the street, south of Reynolds Boulevard, is a cemetery. And then here's a photo of the site's existing access point. There was a preliminary subdivision approved for Whitaker Park, which this site is a part of, at the end of last year, that shows this access point and then another public street coming in to possibly connect with Akron Drive at its intersection with Indiana Avenue. And this is a photo of the eastern boundary of the subject property is over here to the left behind these shrubs. This is the intervening railroad, and then you have Indiana Avenue on the right. Here is that subdivision that was approved last year that I mentioned. The subject property would be lot 7, 8, 9, and 10 on this subdivision plan. Here is the existing access that I mentioned when I was showing you photos earlier. These are the 2 historic buildings that are existing on the site. And then this is the proposed extension of Shorefair Drive, which is a public street, to go as far as it can and line up with Akron Drive at the intersection with Indiana Avenue. The area plan recommends industrial use for the site, and the applicant, again, has asked for a general business limited use. Staff, I'll just get into that here. Legacy recommends that we protect industrial sites, but it also encourages reuse of vacant and underutilized commercial and industrial sites. The North Suburban Area Plan specifically says that this property, as I just showed you, should be used for industrial uses, but broadly calls for creation of new commercial opportunities and redevelopment of existing and underutilized sites, kind of taking on what Legacy also recommends. Staff feels that this proposal would allow for the repurposing and the reuse of those existing buildings and redevelopment of the underutilized land. The approved preliminary subdivision sets the site up for a comprehensive design, no strip development, with limited direct access to adjacent minor thoroughfares, which are Reynolds Boulevard and Indiana Avenue. Indiana Avenue has direct access to transit as well. I believe there's a stop on the corner of Reynolds Boulevard and Indiana Avenue. And then this site makes up a relatively small portion of the existing industrial park, Whitaker Park. with compatible industrial uses allowed. The applicant's list of requested uses includes manufacturing A, which is the least intense manufacturing use allowed. All indoor activities with no outdoor storage and minimal disturbance of adjacent properties as far as odor and noise are concerned. Staff's recommendation pertaining to this request was for approval.
Thank you. No one is signed up to speak. Is anyone here opposed to this recommendation? Any discussion?
Yes. Let me just ask Mr. Corey. This is an industrial site, and the legacy says we should protect industrial site. We know it has access to rail, which is amazing. I think the city has plans to put major roads into this area, investing millions of taxpayer dollars into this area. We weren't really presented with a comprehensive plan saying what was going to happen east of this area, which has tremendous potential under similar types of situations in terms of where it could go in the future as things change in Winston-Salem and different bodies divest of land and what they're doing. What I'm understanding with this is that if we move to this kind of zoning, there is still some industrial that is allowed in this. I'm still want to go on record by saying I am concerned that we're not allowing this other industrial. I understand that there may be opportunities here or whatever, but there's a lot of opportunities in this area, not just with these two buildings. To have an industrial site with full use that close to the urban, that close to the airport, that close to the rail, that close to major highway is a rare thing, and I'm sort of surprised that the powers that be coming together. I think it's there are 3 different groups that are part of this. Would you state who they are?
The applicant was the Whitaker Park Development Authority.
And who are they made up of?
I couldn't tell you. The applicant is here.
Yeah. So I'm a little bit surprised that these groups would come in and give up industrial site for, mixed use or residential or some other type of use along the way. So I am real reserved about it and don't feel in support of giving away this highly desirable land, which we're going to put millions of my tax dollars and others into in a matter of months. So that's where I stand on it.
Thank you.
This is GI general. I mean, this is general use GI, right? You can go as heavy as you want to go right now.
Existing zoning, yes.
I share some of the same concerns. I favor this. I'm going to move for approval in just a second, but I have the same concerns. Steve Smotherman have any kind of comments on this transaction?
Actually, somewhat reserved. Yeah. But keep in mind again, the as set up, this does allow for manufacturing, warehousing, research. Those kind of uses could still go on this parcel. I mean, again, I don't think that's necessarily the intent of what's going on here. But keep in mind that there is a balance of this property, both that the Development Authority controls and then some other industrial property out there that probably totals several hundred acres that would still have access to the rail spur, that would still have the chance for either new construction or redevelopment of existing facilities that are out there. Of course, Reynolds is still out there currently, but you have stuff further to the west on the other side of the active part of Reynolds, but then also to the north of where they're talking about rezoning this 19.5 acre tract. There's still a couple hundred acres that was still available for general use GI zoning at this point. At this point, there hasn't been any indication that that area is going to be requested for rezoning.
Okay, you need a motion?
Okay. Anyone else?
So before you get to a motion, I do want to mention that staff has recommended and the applicant has agreed to conditions related to signage. The general business zoning district allows signs that can be up to 15 feet tall with up to 75 square feet of copy area. We've recommended that they have one sign for an overall development that meets those standards. And then for individual parcels, that they each be limited to a maximum height of 6 feet and a maximum copy area of 36 square feet.
Is that each tax parcel or is that each lot in a platted subdivision?
For each lot.
Okay.
All right, so staff has recommended approval. Is there a motion?
I move approval. Second.
So motion by Mr. Lamb and approved by second by Mr. Grubbs.
One comment before we vote. Is that okay?
Yes, sir. Any further discussion?
Yes, please. All right, so I'll make sure in the logistics chain stuff is what we are here in the town. What is the required zoning for a truck terminal, for example?
It really depends on what they're doing. I mean, generally speaking, warehousing would work. I mean, if it's truly, I mean, if it's heavy freight, there is a freight terminal use, but it really just depends on what they're doing. Again, for heavy freight terminal use, you're generally going to need the rail spur, and again, there is a lot of property out here that's still on a rail spur. I don't know that it would fit in this particular 19.5 acres. Again, warehousing's allowed, freight terminal's a little bit different. We just have to make that judgment call as to, whenever they give us their business plan, which one it falls under.
But generally, it's going to require GI for a truck terminal. Yeah.
Generally, but again, there are warehousing uses that, again, that blur that line somewhat.
Any further discussion? There's a Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say that I support this because I'd like to see this area revitalized, and I see this as an opportunity, and especially the area going up towards Deacon Boulevard, and maybe this will help jumpstart some development there.
Yes. So there's a motion and second on the floor. Those in favor? Opposed, same sign. Passes 6-1. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, this item is on the consent agenda because no one signed up to speak in opposition. I understand that there are people here, though, that are interested in this case, so I just want to say that up front. It is item B8 W3408, which is a request to rezone property from MUS, which is mixed use, to GBS, general business, for the single-use group care facility C. This is a 16.69 acre site at the intersection of Old Greensboro Road and Reedsville Road. This is a photo of the site looking from Old Greensboro Road into the site. There is a private street called Felicity Lane and Felicity Circle that goes through the site. This is an access point on, I believe, it's Felicity Lane. Excuse me. This is a photo of the intersection with the intersection of Old Greensboro Road and Reedsville Road. This intersection will be modified by a state Department of Transportation project in the future, which affects the site frontage. This is a photo that is internal to the site. These buildings are existing, and it's my understanding that the existing buildings are proposed to remain as a part of this request. These are more photos of existing buildings internal to the site. These are far to the west. They are used for residential purposes. They also are proposed to remain, in addition to some additional residential buildings that will be added as part of this request. This is Harvest Lane, which borders the site to the south. And this view is looking westward onto Harvest Drive. I think I said Harvest Lane. Harvest Drive. You can see that there's some single-family residential properties over here on the other side of Harvest Drive. And there's some more single-family residential farther down Harvest Drive to the south of the subject property. The subject property, again, is to the right of this photo. This is a photo taken from Harvest Drive looking into the subject property. There is substantial, significant existing vegetation that separates the subject property from Harvest Drive and the properties on the other side of Harvest Drive. One of the staff recommendations throughout this whole process was that they do everything they can to maintain that existing vegetation and supplement it to a Type 2 buffer yard standard. So this is the proposed site plan with W3408. These buildings that are in the darker shade of blue are all existing, including these two, which I believe are currently used for single-family residential. It should be noted that should this property be rezoned, those properties would become non-conforming. They would lose the ability to be used for single-family residential use should they be vacated for more than 180 days.
More than 180?
80 days.
Okay, thank you.
The buildings shown here in the lighter shade of blue are proposed additional building or new buildings. And here you see one that's split light blue and dark blue. That's an existing building that's proposed for expansion. And I've put here the existing building square footage is 45,307 square feet. And then they're proposing to add another approximately 7,000 square feet. These are the building elevations, and they submitted building elevations for the residential buildings. There's a community building. They have a warehouse-type activity building that is central to the site, this larger, newer building. I included the elevations for the residential buildings because those are the ones that are closest to the neighbors. They have two different building types, and over to the right of this slide, you can see what those materials are. Fiber cement siding, brick foundations. They have standing seam metal, sheet metal roofing for all of these buildings. Staff has recommended some additional conditions. The first one that you see again in bold means that there was a change. The applicant, originally we had spoken with the applicant about a condition to revert the property back to its existing zoning if the property hadn't changed hands or gotten a certificate of occupancy within 1 year of approval from the city council. They came back and asked us if 2 years was fine. We felt like that was acceptable, so we made a slight change to the proposed condition that says 2 years instead of 1 as far as reversion back to MUS zoning. And then there are some additional improvements that will be required prior to issuance of driveway permits, which would be the closing of any unused driveways, including along Harvest Drive. There is currently a kind of informal access from Harvest Drive into the subject property. They would close that access and then record a negative access easement so that no further access would be allowed onto Harvest Drive from the subject property. Staff did recommend approval of this request because of the institutional nature of the use being similar to the uses that have been on the site for the past few years. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions at the moment for Mr. Corley? So you did say that there is opposition here to this case?
There are people here who are interested in the case. I don't know.
Is anyone here in opposition to this case? All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Seeing opposition, and I'm going to go into a public hearing.
Mr. Chair, what we probably want to do is go ahead and pull that, finish the consent agenda, and then we'll come back to that, and that'll be our first public hearing
All right.
item.
We'll pull that till the end. Yeah, that's 8.
Okay, thank you.
So 3408 has been moved to the public hearing agenda.
Yes, sir.
That'll be the first item we hear.
All right.
The next request is B9 W3409, which is a request to rezone property from LI Limited Industrial to LBS, which is limited business. The only requested use was retail store. This site is 1.5 acres at the intersection of Motor Road and Old Walkertown Road. Here is a proposed site plan that the applicant submitted. It shows their retail store, which is Dollar General, if you can read it on the plan, pushed up fairly close to the right-of-way for Old Walkertown Road. Their parking area is over to the side and rear. They have a proposed access point onto Motor Road that follows along the back of the proposed building. Staff had some concerns about the original proposed design of this site that showed a building farther away from the street. The parking lot was closer to the street. We asked the applicant to kind of mitigate the effects of, or the visual impacts of the parking at that intersection by adding a knee wall, a brick knee wall. They have done that, and they have proposed some additional landscaping around the knee wall. They have also submitted elevations meeting the requirements for retail stores. So if you all know what Dollar General is, typically you see a Dollar General, it's a metal building and it's a big box. The new regulations from a text amendment that was approved, I believe last year, required the building materials to be of higher quality. And I'm not sure, I didn't include elevations in the consent agenda presentation, but the applicant proposes a brick foundation with hardy board siding. Staff had continued concerns even after the applicant came back with those changes about the proposed access onto Motor Road and the lack of connection with the property to the east. The area plan recommends mixed use for this site and a whole lot of property to the north and west, including the property to the east. Staff believes that mixed use development should be connected internally by a private or public street network. We also had concerns about the location of the access drive onto Motor Road because the location closer to the intersection doesn't really encourage development farther to the north, a comprehensive development, including properties to the north. We've been talking with the applicant back and forth. They are here today. They have a revised plan. I don't know if the board is interested in seeing that plan and hearing from the applicant, but staff did initially recommend approval of the proposal if those two concerns had been addressed.
I need to get a clarification on
Yes.
something else. Now, in our book, number 2, in terms of the notes of the construction material, is ribbed metal wall panels provided by metal building manufacturers, galvanized. Is help me understand whether that's the walls and whether we allow that or not.
That's behind the brick veneer.
That's behind the brick veneer.
That's right. The brick veneer foundation will have that metal behind it.
So that will be just the bottom wainscot, so to speak, of brick. And then it will be hardy board going up from there?
Mm-hmm. The skeleton of the building essentially is metal stud and metal panels.
Yeah, okay. But that isn't outside then. Okay.
Anyone else?
Well, I'd be interested in hearing from the proponent
You'd like to hear from the
about the changes.
All right. All right, then, seeing that, we will hear from the proponent. As a reminder, each person has 12 minutes. So who's going to speak? Open up for a public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, what we may want to do for this one is maybe hold this, and we'll revisit that on the public hearing as well. We'll come right, but that'll follow right after the Trosa case. We'll come back so we can give so we can continue this discussion.
I was trying to get you out of here. It's not my fault, all right? I'm trying to move on. All right, so we'll pull that one as well. Okay, yeah, I didn't go there. So thank you. All right, we've pulled it. Thank you.
The next item on the consent agenda is in section C. It's C1 F1584, which is a special use permit request for land clearing and inert debris landfill. The subject property is 41.61 acres. Existing zoning is AG. This is on the west side of Germantown Road, north of Memorial Industrial School Road. This is the site plan that the applicant, this is the most recent site plan that the applicant has submitted. Staff initially had concerns about the location of this security gate as well as the proximity of this drive to the neighboring house. We asked them to provide some additional treatment along the required buffer between the use and the property. They have proposed, I don't know how well you can see it here, a 6-foot opaque fence. And then staff recommended an additional condition that will require this 200-foot buffer that you see here all around the use to remain undisturbed. So they would not be able to touch any of that vegetation. We also have recommended that no permits be issued until they have the green light from the State Department of Environmental Quality, and that the hours of operation are limited to between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. At this point, I would remind the board that the special use permits approval is given by the elected body, which is the Forsyth County Board of Commissioners in this case. The role of the planning board here is to make a recommendation or report to the Forsyth County Board of Commissioners as to the adherence of the proposed site plan to the regulations in the Unified Development Ordinances.
Corey, on the comments by Winston-Salem DOT, there was wheel stops, question mark. What does that refer to?
Parking spaces in gravel lots.
Up on the site?
Yes.
Okay, so up on the site.
Yeah, that's how they're delineated with wheel stops.
In the comments from CPAD, Rural Hall Area Plan Update recommends a site for large lot residential development. What is this referring to?
It's the same thing that we've discussed in other cases previously. The area plan recommends a specific, or not a specific, but recommends that this area, which is primarily rural, to continue to be large lot residential. That being said, the UDO does allow the LCID use in the agricultural zoning district. So the applicant can request this use even if the area plan recommends something different.
But we are saying that the area plan recommended large lot residential, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So do you as staff find that this is in consistency with the area plan?
So keep in mind, as Desmond kind of elaborated on there, we have the area plan recommendations, and then in each of the zoning districts, we have a list of uses that are allowed, whether that be uses permitted by right, planning board review, board of adjustment, or elected body. It's essentially deemed those uses are basically in harmony with the comp plan, but you have to go through those approval processes. In this case, it's coming through the planning board for review for the site plan, and then on to the elected body where, in order to get this, there's the discussion of those 4 findings of fact, and that's how that approval process will work at the commissioners. There'll be 4 findings. Applicants will get up, they will present their testimony as to why that they believe that meets that, and then the neighbors will have or any opposition would have an opportunity to speak to those 4 findings, and then the commissioners make the decision.
But is not one of those findings of fact legacy and planning?
But if the use is allowed in the zoning district that it's being requested, regardless of the type of permit request that it requires, in this case a special use permit, it's presumed to be consistent with the plan and consistent with the recommended land use unless it's demonstrated by the opposition that it's not.
Well, I'm finding that a hard sell. I mean, when a area plan gets together and says, we would like to see this continued as residential, and then we do a bait and switch and say, but it can be used for this, this, and this as well.
But all those
I don't see that consistent with the planning process, and that's where I'm trying to find out, because that is one of the 4 criteria we look at in terms of doing this, and I have to respect that there was some effort put into that.
But it's currently zoned ag, right?
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, but the area plan says how it should be used for. So theoretically, if the ag wanted to go residential, we would say, hey, that's part of the area plan. We feel pretty good about that.
Correct. I'm sorry. Somebody else?
No.
I had some questions.
Yes.
Just trying to get clarity on this.
Just because I don't know a lot about the siting requirements for landfills, I just wanted to ask you a couple questions about that.
Sure.
First of all, is there a size cap for these types of landfills? I mean, can they be of unlimited size is what I'm asking.
There's no requirement on the maximum size. The way our ordinance is broken down is there's basically two types of LCIDs, 2 acres or less or 2 acres or greater. With the 2 acres or greater, there's nothing in the use conditions I'm seeing that limits the maximum size. In this case, there is a limit, and that's what the site plan is showing is the boundaries of that. So
Limited by the site plan.
correct.
200 yard, the
Yeah.
200 buffer yards.
Yeah.
Correct.
But even the larger is going to be limited by proximity to houses and other uses.
Correct. You're
So
essentially
it's
backing
not-
into your usable area when you take in your setbacks, your buffers, and all the other requirements. You're kind of backing into what that area is.
So the main siting requirements would be the buffers and the setbacks from
Correct.
residential, for example.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Can there be an accessory use that would involve some type of recycling or repurposing of the materials?
There
There
is.
is, and it's
Yeah.
limited to 25% of the fill area. So there's a formula in the use condition for that as well. It can't exceed 25% of the area of the actual fill. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is that something they apply for up front in the site plan, or is that something that comes later?
It's actually contemplated and shown on this plan.
Right, that's what I was asking about, because there was a comment in there, something about a 25-foot separation distance between the fill area and the recycling area, and what the question was, is that being respected here on the site plan?
Yes, this is the most recent site plan, which is consistent with the use conditions in the UDO.
But there is a proper separation distance then?
Yes.
Okay. What else was I going to ask about? The erosion control. Is that something that, I know you need an erosion control plan. Is that something that is an ongoing requirement throughout the whole use of the landfill, or is it like a one-time, you get the plan approved and then that's it?
You have to get an erosion control permit, or I'm sorry, yeah, an erosion control permit before you do anything. And that's just one step, just like this is, in a series of steps to have this use approved before it can even get off the ground. I don't know if the erosion control process is continuous through the life of the use, which is temporary, or whether there's a certain point at which required erosion control measures are eliminated.
They
They
also,
would have to have the site stabilized to be able to get that permit finally approved, and then it would be on a complaint basis after that if there became some exposed soil that caused a runoff issue.
and to keep in mind, this is regulated by the state of North Carolina as well, dealing with landfills and landfill regulations. They have to get a permit through the state. I'm not sure the amount of area you can have open at one time. I know basically you open, it's kind of like a sanitary landfill where you can open cells and then close cells, and there's reclamation plans that have to be filed in the Office of the Register of Deeds that also have to be approved by the state of North Carolina. There are lots of regulations that go into these. I don't pretend to know them all. I've never obviously gotten a permit for one, but I know that the engineer for the petitioner is here, I think, who may be able to answer those questions about other permitting things. But again, it certainly is subject to erosion control, ongoing erosion control. If you get a permit, the permit is valid while you still have exposed soils and those kind of things, and you only get cleared from that permit once you have final stabilization. And again, I think that's probably done cell by cell and area by area on the site.
Well, and if I may add on to that, since one of the areas of our review is to see if they are meeting that in order to have this approval on this, could we have the engineer come up after this line of questions to see whether they are meeting those kinds of and what kind of thought they put into that? I think she was still had some other questions.
I just had one more. I'm sorry to
Go
take
ahead,
up so
Ms.
much time. And that is for the plan for rehabilitation after the landfill closes. It said in there that you need to file this plan in order to get a permit. That has to be filed up front. And I didn't understand who reviews it. Who is to review the plan to determine that it's adequate?
Well, it has to be filed in the Register of Deeds, but it's part, I mean, again, in addition to local permitting, they have to go through the state permitting process. So it would be subject to DWQ, DENR, I'm not exactly sure which entity is over the landfill section, but it would be their staff that would review that reclamation plan and say whether or not it met those requirements.
Thank you.
I move approval.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, thank you. For those in favor, sign aye. Opposes?
And furthermore, I do not think it is in consistency with the area plan.
All right. Passes 6-1. That was motioned by Mr. Lamb and seconded by Ms. Smith. Sir, this isn't a public hearing, so this was simply a review for us to make sure that it meets the minimum UDO requirements. You will have that opportunity to speak as it goes before the county commissioners.
Yes, but I don't think that the right information has been given by what's out there already. We also have a highway coming through there, highway number 8 in Germany. And all of that is resident. And we've been through our neighborhood, I have anyway. Yesterday, and I got about 40 people who didn't know about the whole thing.
Yes, sir.
And all of number 8, all of the way up. And that's one area where that thing is going to be built. The power company, part of that land, and that land, what they're talking about, is going to run right into the back of our houses. Chestnut Trail, different wood, and the houses along number 8. They're up in there. And so we'll get that.
Yes, sir. And sir, your concerns are duly noted. Again, this is just a review to make sure that it meets the minimum UDO requirements. There will be a hearing. It will go to the county commissioners, and at that time, they will have a public hearing and hear from everyone who is in opposition. But today is not that time for the opposition.
Have we got somebody that he can be directed to
Is there anyone that they can be directed to?
sort of figure out who he goes to for all these concerns?
Yep.
It's more than us.
If he can hang tight, we'll send a staff member out and we'll.
Because I see some more hands. So if you all can hang tight, we can get information to you on who you can speak with.
Are we ready?
Yes, sir. Sir, if you could hang tight, we're going to have someone that you can speak with.
Sir, I just would like for our community members that are here to stay. That's all I have nothing.
All right.
People tested in concern.
That is duly noted. Thank you all for coming out, and please, again, when it goes before the county commissioners, please make your presence known.
Could I just talk to that person to give them my contact information?
Yes, sir. I think there's someone going to be out there now. All right. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, I want to forewarn about some potential technical difficulties. I just got an alert that the computer's going to restart, and I can't seem to stop it from doing that. We have about 4 minutes before that happens. So,
Talk quickly.
the next item on the consent agenda is a preliminary subdivision. Is item D1, 2019-023. It's a 14.48 acre site with existing zoning RS9. The applicant has submitted a request to continue, they have submitted a request to continue their petition to the May meeting. I'll go ahead and show you the proposed site plan because they didn't meet the deadline for automatic continuance. So the board would need to take a vote entertain a motion and take a vote to continue the case or to approve or deny it
All right.
at this time.
Thank you.
Move approval. I'm sorry, the request has been to continue this
To
case.
continue.
Yes.
Yeah, I move that we recommend that we grant the request for the continuance.
Motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Grubbs. All those in favor? Those opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you.
Wonderful. This is the last, I think this is the last item on the consent agenda. It is a planning board review, which you are the approval authority. This is a planned residential development for Charlton Farms, which is formerly known as Deacon Woods. It's almost 10 acres, currently zoned to RS9. It's on the south side of Polo Road, east of Marlowe Avenue. This is the proposed site plan. There was a subdivision approved here a few years ago, originally for 31 9,000 square foot minimum lots. The PRD, the Planned Residential Development, allows them to have smaller lots in exchange for community gathering space, which is right here on your site plan. The applicant meets all of the UDO requirements. Staff has reviewed this to make sure of that fact. The streets that are shown on here are existing. Staff recommends approval of this
Move approval.
request.
Motion by Mr. Lamb.
I had a question.
Okay.
So we're increasing the number of units from the previous proposal?
Yes, this request is for 43 units,
And what was the previous one?
31.
31. Okay. Because the other one wasn't a PRD and this one is a PRD?
Yes.
Okay. And the buffer for the PRD, is that 25 feet? Is that
It's
The 30-foot perimeter buffer.
the buffer for the PRD adjoining residential, single family? I'm just wondering, is the width of the buffer?
30 foot.
30 foot, okay. And had we at one time talked about changing that?
We did. Kelly Bennett brought forward some recommendations. It was either within the last year or the last 2 years, and that was one of the things that we talked about. But at the end of the day, the recommendation was to stick with the 30-foot. I think that report was to try to find more ways for infill development to kind of work and some standards that may provide some more flexibility. But at the end of the day, the recommendation was to stick with the 30-foot.
Well, I'd just like to say that this case to me shows the virtue in that.
Thank you so very much. There is a motion on the floor by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Bryan. Those in favor? Those the same sign. Passes unanimously. There was some
So,
technical
Mr. Chairman, that
difficulties
was,
now.
we have experienced our technical difficulties. That was the last item on the consent agenda. From my recollection, there were 2 items that were pulled from the consent agenda. The next one to be heard is W3408.
Correct.
Which is TROSA, so we'll get that set up when I have a computer again.
Mr. Chair, perhaps one thing to consider is maybe to take a 5 to 10 minute recess to give us time to get this technical difficulty squared away. We've been at it about an hour. If anybody needs to get up, we can recess for about 5 or 10 minutes, then we can start back up once the
All right,
computer's
we're going
ready.
into recess for 5 minutes. Thank you. We are the zoning petition of the Commons for Forsyth County. I think we're going to open it back up for staff to give a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'll try to be brief, as Desmond did an excellent job going through this earlier. The petitioner is the Commons of Forsyth County, Inc., and the site is 16.69 acres, located on the west side of Old Greensboro Road at its intersection with US 158 Reedsville Road. And the request is to rezone property from MUS, Mixed Use, Special Use District, to and a little bit of RS9 to GBS, General Business Special Use, for the single use of Group Care Facility C. This is a new use that was adopted into the ordinance last year and allows for housing and rehabilitation services for people that are experiencing substance abuse. And it allows people up to 250 residents with a Group Care Facility C. This is Legacy's growth management plan. It's located within the suburban neighborhoods, growth management area, 2 urban neighborhoods. They're on Reedsville Road. This is a location map showing the subject property located there in yellow. You can see the darker building footprints of the existing buildings that are located on the site. Most all of it is zoned MUS. There is a small little portion here of undeveloped property on Harvest Drive, zoned RS9. Again, it fronts on Old Greensboro Road there at its intersection with Reedsville Road. Harvest Drive abuts the western portion of the site and single-family homes along Harvest Drive. This is an aerial photograph showing the subject property. Most of the current development is along the southern portion of it. There's some significant topography, grade changes on the north portion where it's heavily wooded. And the proposed development, as you'll see on the site plan, is located right in here along Harvest Drive and then internal to the site. This is the East-Northeast Winston-Salem area plan. It was adopted in 2015, showing a color representation for all the different land uses. Green would be for parks, blue is institutional, and yellow is single-family residential. The subject property is shown in, I guess that you call that magenta, for mixed-use development. That's the entire site there. So that's really kind of complementary to the existing zoning, which has a mixture of residential, even a restaurant use, hospice, palliative care, and some other institutional uses based upon the historical use of this property. So the area plan does recommend for this to remain as mixed-use residential with some other institutional uses, and it has some specific recommendations about expansions within that, and I'll go over that with the site plan. These images are taken on site. Pardon, they're a little bit dark, but this is looking across Old Greensboro Road into the subject property. There's several buildings there that were approved for GOS in 1989, so it has a pretty long history of institutional use. Currently now it's used for the Commons. That's a collaborative use of many different service providers that provide services for homeless individuals, including medical services and housing. This is looking northeast there at the intersection of Greensboro Road and Reedsville Road. The site is located to the left, and this is where, as Desmond mentioned, the intersection would be reworked. That construction would start in 2021. Looking across Old Greensboro Road, internal to the site, you see these existing buildings that you saw earlier. Along the northern terminus of Felicity Lane, you have some residential buildings there. Harvest Drive is off the image to the left. The proposed site plan shows an extension of Felicity Lane of about 550 feet, where there will be 4 new 2-story buildings located on the left side of this image. Out on the Old Greensboro Road, you'll see an existing commercial establishment there. Looking towards its intersection with Reedsville, and subject property and entrance are located right there. Greensboro Road is a minor thoroughfare. It has extra capacity, and it is served with transit. On Harvest Drive, looking north, single-family homes to the left, the subject property to the right. A couple of the single-family homes there along Harvest Drive. This is at the northern end Right now, as Desmond mentioned, there is a pretty substantial distance and thick planting area along Harvest Drive that would be retained. There is one informal entrance there that would be removed and planted back there onto Harvest Drive, and a negative access easement would be recorded along Harvest. So that was one of the concerns that staff had, and as is noted in the area plan, no access onto Harvest Drive. These are some of the existing buildings there. This is a proposed site plan. The the darker blue buildings, about 43,000 square feet, are existing. You see 158 here, Old Greensboro Road, existing entrances there, and Felicity Lane going down in this direction here. It terminates about right there now at these two buildings that you saw earlier. The lighter blue buildings are new residential buildings in this area, 4 of them, 2-story buildings, community building here, community building expansion here, and a gym located in this area here. Again, the petitioner has been very good to work with staff in regard to sensitivity to Harvest Drive. They've agreed to maintain that same kind of building line. These are about 75 feet off of Harvest Drive, therefore keeping this existing vegetation, and that would be supplemented by a Type 3 20-foot buffer yard. Also, the purple area here shows a proposed fence that will be on the inside of about 50 feet off the Harvest Drive right-of-way. Building elevations of the residential units. An analysis, the site again has historically been used for a mixture of institutional related uses in a campus setting. This use does not include any standalone commercial uses, so those can be accessory and supplementary to the rehabilitation services of the group care facility C, but you cannot have a standalone restaurant, standalone retail store such as that. Excuse me, let me back up and hit that other point. The site is located at the intersection of a major and minor thoroughfare, and again, it is served by transit. As Desmond mentioned, we have a slight revision to one of the conditions. This is in an area where we would typically see the GB district, General Business District. There is no other commercial zoning adjacent to this site, but this is the only use at this, the only district that this use is allowed in, and that's the only use that they're asking for too, Group Care Facility C. So in consideration of that, the petitioners are agreeable to what we would call a reversion clause or reversion condition, to where if they do not get their certificate of occupancy within, we had in your book 1 year, they would like 2 years to get fully into the site, get their CO. If that does not happen within 2 years, then the zoning would revert back to RS9 and MUS. So that's one little change there in the condition that you have in your book. And finally, it would address a growing community need by serving people who are suffering from the effects of substance abuse. With that being said, staff's recommendation is for approval, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
All right, are there any questions for staff at this point? All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So where does Legacy stand on this?
Well, Legacy recommends uses that are consistent with the area plan, number one, which this is. And number two, it does recommend expansion of institutional uses when they're done in a manner compatible with the surrounding area. And we feel like their treatment, again, on Harvest Drive really meets that need. Meets that recommendation.
Close, yeah.
Also, just looking back at the site plan again, because of the large aspect of the site, they are not required to provide a stormwater management facility. They will have to do a stormwater management study. But again, this is over 16 acres, so they're not showing a stormwater pond. They originally had shown one here, but determined that at this stage there's no need for that, and this is their tree save area located here. And I'll be glad, again, answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts.
Yes, sir.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Roberts? All right, so before we went into recess, there is opposition to this case, so we're now going to open up for a public hearing. Again, each side has up to 12 minutes total to speak. I do have two that have signed up in favor of this, Marshall McDuffie and I think Dan Jewell. So if you would come to the podium, please. Again, if you would state your name, your address, and your zip code for the record, and speak in the microphone. Thank you.
I'm in here for the Fifth Ward.
Yes, sir, if you could please state your name, your address, and your zip code first. Thank you for the
My
record.
name is Marshall McDuffie.
Thank you.
I'm 2404 Kingsgate Drive, Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
And your zip code?
Zip code 27101.
Thank you.
Okay. I in position of speaking for the Fifth Ward that I come to oppose it for the simple reasons with the people that we have in our community now. Our property has gone down. So to bring these training institute in...
I'm sorry, Mr. McDuffie, you actually signed in the wrong spot. So I'm going to have to ask you to come back because this is for the proponents first.
Proposed, okay.
Yes, sir. So there's only one proponent then, and that's Mr. Dan Jewell. If you will state your name and
Yes,
address.
sir. And maybe we do have a PowerPoint presentation. If I can get some assistance on getting it up, I am very technologically challenged. Great. Thank you, Gary. My name is Dan Jewell. Good evening, everyone. I am president of Coulter Jewell Thames. We are a land planning, landscape architecture, civil engineering, located at 111 West Main Street in Durham, zip code 27701.
Thank you.
Here at the request of TROSA. We are working with them just to tell you a little bit about the program and a little bit about the project. And again, thank you for having us this evening. Many of you were here last fall when we came through and presented you the text amendment which created the new use category, which we're here before you tonight. Just a little, TROSA is an innovative multi-year residential program that turns people back into contributing members of the community, and they have been very successful in doing that for 25 years now. They're a 501c3, which is actually one of the requirements in the in this section of the code, and they are licensed by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. What do? They provide all of these programs, all of this training, and all of this assistance at no cost to the individual. Housing, health care, mental health, vocational training, continuing care for graduates, including housing, transportation, and counseling. I have given a couple of cars to TROSA myself over the last several years. And TROSA has been a great neighbor in the Durham community. They give back to the community in many hours of volunteer service. They look out for their neighbors. TROSA has the main campus on James Street in Durham, but they have other satellite campuses around downtown as well. For an example, the main James Street campus did an expansion about 5 years ago, added about 50 new residents. In that time frame, since that happened, crime in that neighborhood dropped by 34% and burglaries dropped by over 50%. And they have been a long recipient of community awards for all of the community service and nonprofit stuff they do. Letters of support, wanted to show these quickly. These are very, very strong. This represents 22 years of mayors in Durham, including Mayor Bell, who was mayor from 2001 to 2017, Nick Tennyson, who was mayor back in the late 90s, and most recently was North Carolina Secretary of Transportation, and also our current mayor, Steve Schewel, who had a very busy day yesterday on the news, keeping people informed on that terrible explosion that we had in downtown Durham about 5 blocks from our office. There's been talk about, there was one concern about, can TROSA coexist with a school? We know there are schools in the neighborhood. Well, it just so happens that their North Campus in downtown Durham, which has 180 residents, is actually shares a park with a charter school on the other side of the park. TROSA is in an old school themselves at that location, but here is a letter of endorsement for TROSA from the Central Park School for Children that shows what great neighbors and what great collaborators they have been. So why here? Based on nearly 25 years of experience, TROSA now thinks that the future growth is to create satellite campuses in several locations in the state. This would be the very first. The target size would be 100 to 125 people initially, with future expansion to bring the capacity up to about 200. One of the main reasons they are very interested in the triad and this site in particular is 2 of the top 5 most served counties by their program are Forsyth and Guilford. It's close enough to the Durham operation, hour and 15 minutes up and down the road if there's no traffic, which is less and less frequent these days, and there's excellent potential for health care, including with a program that's already located on the site. We were told time and time again that community outreach is so important, particularly at this location. Just in 2019, and keep in mind their community outreach actually started early in 2018, just in 2019, they went door to door to all of the neighbors and invited them to upcoming meetings and asked them if they had any questions. There have been a series of 4 community meetings since January 18th, the last one on February 28th, at the Commons, where folks showed up. They were able to ask questions. They were given a presentation. If you're interested, we have all the detailed information on how many people showed up, what their names were, what their questions were, that sort of thing. So this is, I think, an extraordinary amount of community outreach. What I also wanted to do is talk to you a little bit more about the plan and the specifics. I wanted to show this in particular. This is actually an aerial view of their Durham campus on James Street. And the reason I show you this is it will show you how this and their operation informed what we're proposing here in Winston-Salem. This property was actually an old dairy operation. Farmers brought their milk here, they processed it, they made ice cream and got into the milk trucks that many of you used to remember come up and down the road. But we did this master plan about 20 years ago. We got a special use permit approved through the Durham City Council in 2001, and since then they have starting with the existing buildings, which are now educational facilities, support facilities, training facilities. They have built a gymnasium, many different types of residential housing. We were very careful in making sure that the housing at the perimeters was similar in scale and look to the housing in the neighborhood. And as I said, TROSA has been a very good neighbor. This is a little bit different version of the site plan that Desmond and Gary showed you, but it does highlight a few things. One, if you remember that aerial image from Durham, this is a much less intense use of this property than the Durham property is, and this is what we're committing to. The browner buildings are the existing facilities. The green shows the green that will either be maintained or enhanced. The light colored is the new proposed buildings, which, by the way, will be built in phases. This is an existing building that will be expanded and become the cafeteria, training, things of that nature. This will become the campus support facility where, when they get large volumes of donated food and goods and office and things of that nature, maintenance, that'll take place there. This is actually a covered basketball court. It's not a building per se, it's a shelter over a basketball court, as it does get hot in the middle of summer with the sun shining down. And as Gary and Desmond said a few minutes ago, we are then proposing to add some additional residential buildings down this stretch parallel to Harvest, but again, keep in mind that these buildings are about twice as far from Harvest as the base ordinance would allow in terms of setbacks and buffers. We will save as much existing vegetation as possible, and that we can't save, we will supplement with additional vegetation. And again, we're also closing that existing driveway on Harvest. And just to sort of put it in that same perspective of the image I showed you from Durham a few minutes ago, this is how that all lays out. Old Greensboro Highway with 158 here. We are going to be reworking the entrance so that it's safer than it is today. We're going to have one way in rather than 2 ways in and out. We're going to widen the driveway here. This will be the new building set way back off the street. So you can see that the perimeter, we are adjacent to the streets and residential neighborhoods, will remain the same as it is today, with the exception of a few new residential buildings built over here. This is that expansion of the building I told you about a minute ago, and the additional, but you can see all the woods that will remain on site. And this plan is binding if and hopefully will be recommended for approval by you and ultimately the City Council. So that's enough. I've used up enough of my time. We have the whole team here, leadership from TROSA, members of the design team, including the architects and myself, available to answer any questions you might have, and thank you again for your consideration.
Can I ask a quick question? What level of freedom of movement on and off campus do your residents have?
Very much so.
Okay.
Very, very much freedom of movement.
So they're allowed to leave to go to neighborhood businesses, things like that.
Brian Buellin, 1820 James Street, Durham, North Carolina, 27707. I'm project lead on the expansion efforts for TROSA. I've been staff there and involved with TROSA for approximately 6 years. We are a very controlled community. There's 24/7 monitoring of where our residents are and accountability of where they are. When they first get in the program, that is a lot more accountability, a lot more strict. As they go through the program, they do get more leniency out in the community, but it is still controlled at all times.
Does that mean the accountability includes a curfew for the residents?
There's always curfew for our residents. They're always going to. We know where they are at all times, including out in town and when they will be back. There are overnight visits and things like that, but those are closely monitored with other residents in the programs and things like that. This will not be people wandering around the streets outside of the facility, coming and going as they please. It's not that kind of program.
Thank you.
You're coming in. Oh, go ahead.
Question about the possibility of accessory commercial uses that Mr. Roberts alluded to. What might those be, and do you anticipate those?
Like a framing shop and that sort of thing within the.
Not on site.
Not on this site.
Not on this site.
Nothing. No commercial retail front on the site. We do run vocational training enterprises at our current site in Durham. We do have a small catering business that's co-located with our kitchen and very small things like that. In the beginning of operations, we expect to open up a small lawn care service with minimal trucks going in and out of that site, but nothing on site as far as business operations, vocational training operations.
So, but if you do anticipate the lawn care operation as being part of this, then?
Correct, we do.
Okay. So it would need a permit for commercial activity, or no?
It was built in the use group care facility C, whenever, because if you remember, TROSA was actually the petitioner for the text amendment for group care facility C. So they basically modeled the proposed use and the use conditions on kind of the model and methodology they had used in Durham. So the use condition accounts for that. There's some limitations on the amount of square footage that can be devoted to that based on the overall square footage and some other things. And I'm actually trying to look up the ordinance now, but suffice it to say what they're proposing complies with what those requirements are.
Sorry. I would add, this is Keith Arton. I live at 12 Prentice Place in Durham, North Carolina. I'm with TROSA. I've been there for 18 years. And just so you have a sense, our operations in Durham, we have about 470 men and women, and our lawn care operation has been in operations there since 2003, I believe, that we did a full service lawn care operation. And at this point, we only have 10 crews at this point. So that's 10 trucks. That's how large we've gotten in Durham, with a facility about 2.5 times the size of this facility.
So you might need to park vehicles for the business there, and then you come in and go from that location?
Yeah, but I can't remember what the requirements were for parking, but I know we did not maximize our parking space. I can't remember the total parking spaces we put on that.
That's correct. We have, the site plan shows some additional pavement in the campus support building facility area where if a few trucks needed to be parked, they could be.
Yeah, and basically there is prohibition in the text for the use on outdoor storage. It says all materials and/or equipment associated with this use and any accessory uses must be stored inside except for licensed motor vehicles. So if you have a truck that pulls a trailer, I mean those are licensed motor vehicles. But if you can't have outdoor storage of lawn equipment, of mulch, of things that would be used in association with the lawn care business.
Yes, we still have a little time.
You're asking for a major accommodation with zoning in an area in a neighborhood. what do you see that this combination of changing this and this institution coming in will bring as a direct benefit to this neighborhood, to the people that live across the street, Harvest Drive, that area like that, and how will this improve that area with tax base?
I'll say that I can speak to the property in Durham. So our maintenance of the property, we use our facility as a training ground for lawn care. That's the reason we do a lawn care business. So we sort of use that as a staging area. So we do a lot of landscaping improvements and things of that nature. We've done that in all of our properties in Durham. We would do the same here. We do have a history of, and I apologize, I don't have those numbers in my hand, but I know we did a study of property values in the neighborhood around Durham, and obviously property values are, well, I shouldn't say obviously, property values are going up throughout Durham for the last several years, but specifically in the neighborhood surrounding our James Street property that we showed you, that 13-plus acre property in a residential neighborhood, property values have increased more on average than throughout Durham, and the homes have been on the market shorter than other neighborhoods in Durham. And we also have had a positive impact on crime reduction in all the neighborhoods that we've been a part of. I believe that's...
Are any of your activities taxable?
No, sir. We're
not even the lawn and stuff like that?
As long as it's attached to the operations of the program that we're operating, it is not. We do, we spend money in the community, so I have to again pull those numbers. I have them in my notebook over there, but we do have numbers on how much we've spent in the neighborhoods that we're in Durham, and we've correlated that to what we believe we would be spending in Winston-Salem on things like food and fuel and things of that nature. In addition, we're talking about investing probably in excess of $10 million in construction on this property, and the general contractor intends on using local subcontractors for the vast majority of the work.
Thank you.
All right. Any further questions for the proponents? All right, thank you very kindly.
And, there were some, at least one neighbor I know who wanted to say a few words.
And we do have 3 minutes because the last several minutes have been questioned.
3 minutes, all right.
Thank you for hearing me. My name is Hilton Stone Jr., and I live in the neighborhood. I live on Harvest Drive, and I've been there ever since 1997.
Bishop Stone, can you give your address, please?
1490 Harvest Drive.
And zip code?
27101.
Thank you, sir.
And I live across from the property, and I've been there, like I said, since 1977. And I went to several of the meetings over at the property, and I also went to visit the facility in Durham. And I was really impressed myself. I'm for it because I think it's a good program. And like I said, me and my wife, we went down, and several others went down to the property. And I was really impressed what they're doing, how they've helped so many people. And I feel like, that this would be something good for the city. And like I said, me and my wife went down, and we met several of the tenants that was there, and people that have been through the program and have had problems, and how it helped them and brought them out of what they've gone through. So I feel like I came down tonight, and like I said, I've been to several meetings. I told them I'd be here tonight. I run a little behind time tonight, but I wanted to be here because I wanted to give my support for this program. I think it's good for the city. And like I say, man, I hope that the city will consider that, that think about what Troy's trying to do, because I think it'd be real beneficial for Winston-Salem. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Stone.
Still got 2 minutes.
Still have 2 minutes if anyone else wants to speak in favor of this. All right. Okay. Yes, ma'am. For the record, Mr. Stone, if you will give your name, address, and zip code, please.
Lily Stone, 1490 Harvest Drive, 27101.
Thank you.
Just like my husband said, we went down. I'm not talking about people. We went down to the facility, and it was very interesting to me to see how many people got delivered. And the people that got delivered, they work for the facility. Those are all the employees they have. We heard a lot of people that was involved with a lot of drugs, and they were delivered. So I'm totally for it. I'm not afraid of them coming in the neighborhood because if we don't let this come in and helping people, no telling what might get over there at their facility. So I'm very well for it myself too, and it's a very great program.
Thank you very kindly.
Minute 20.
Anyone else? We have a minute and 20 seconds left for those in favor. All right. Seeing none, I saw a thumbs up. We now do have opposition. Mr. McDuffie, you had come up first, and you've already stated your name and address and zip code, so you can continue where you left off, and I think we have one more. So,
well, due to the fact that I was raised or I was living in the area on Edron Drive, all of these guys are my neighbors. Our kids went to school together and finished high school. But since they started to build the building and everything, they were isolated. We never knew at the beginning of the first 10 or 15 years what was going on. So I'm seeing, and I've been around kids, and I've worked with Boy Scouts and so forth. But this is getting out into the community. And if any of them get out into the community, it's dangerous. We got two school systems in between, East High School and Atkins Academy. We got there's another school there. With it, I'm for anybody that want to get better. But it's only, and I'm interested that we have enough in East Winston, all from Highland on 4th Street all the way up to Martin Luther King. We got facilities there for kids, and then we had our hospital, KDB Hospital. It was turned over to the welfare. So all of the things that we have been taking care of, everybody's problems, kids in East Winston. Our property has gone down. So with it, I'm not against the organization, but our community, the 5th District, needs an uplifting hand. With this, it's a closed-in facility. How else are you going to keep them under control? They work on campus and so forth. I'm for that. But we want them out in the community working with us. We got the Y. We got other activities going on. We'd like to find out, even with Mississippi, the East Ward, how can you help East Ward grow within that community and around that compound? And I'm for it. But with it, it is not helping us in East Winston. We don't have grocery store. We have one grocery store. And out. We don't have a few eatery places. So we are lack of business, growing institutions where people can come in our neighborhood and work somewhere and make some money. This organization train them and everything, and we're just hoping that there will be an open opportunity for them to get in jobs. So with it, I have opposed it because of what we have gone through. And the future, with us uniting together, we can do anything. Together we stand, divided we will fall. So this is why I'm denying it until we actually see some type of motivation that we can also help them to make our community better than what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDuffie. Any questions for Mr. McDuffie? I think we had anyone else in opposition for this? No, that's the next case. Okay.
We have 8.5 minutes.
8.5 minutes left for anyone who wants to speak in opposition. All right. So can we have rebuttal from, okay, that's it. All right. So seeing no one else wants to speak, we're going to close the public hearing. Board, what is your pleasure? Any further discussion?
Yeah, it has been just a matter of months since we changed the UDO to allow large treatment. And you folks know my history. I was the CEO of the largest residential place in Winston. Yep. And we had up to 900 kids at one time. So I truly believe in institutions and abilities of residential programs to make a difference. When I look at this site, and I have a long history with Human Service Alliance and what occurred on that site from the day before it even came into Winston-Salem. So I go way back with this particular site. And I can see from being a residential manager why this site is so attractive. It has a little bit of history. It has some buildings that you can build on and things like that. But I need to appeal to you folks not to be swayed by that particular line of thinking. What we looked at, and I think the city council and county commissioners, when they were looking at this, were concerned about, large residential and how this was worked. Very carefully, it was crafted so that this could go into general business area, right? So I guess what I fully expected once that was passed this institution would come into our community. They'd say, look, here's a general business area, which already has its protections in place and things there, and say, we would like to be there. And I would say, yes, that's great. But instead, what we have is an institution coming in, looking at a residential area in a mixed-use area in a neighborhood that isn't general business, and saying, we want you to change the zoning so we could be there. Well, we have other places that do that. We did that with ARCA just, last month. And ARCA was up next to the Humane Society and what had been the juvenile delinquency and a treatment program for sexually abused kids who were sexually acting out. So, and right across was general business and general business on the other side and general business behind it and all this kind of stuff like that. In this situation, though, we've got somebody coming in and trying to say, well, we could do this in general business, but you're going to have to change this right next to residential, right in a neighborhood, which really, this is a potentially highly desirable intersection that should be able to generate business in the future and really help out the neighborhood, provide jobs for the neighborhood, tax base for the neighborhood, and things like that. And I would really implore that we not approve this. I think that TROSA can find general business zoning that will work for them and would come back in, and then I could be fully supportive of that, because I truly believe that works and know the people that are supporting it down in Durham. So I don't feel that we should force an issue of changing zoning when we have been so deliberate about what kind of zoning this group ought to come and find in our community.
If I have a comment. I went to school at North Carolina Central University and spent a lot of time in downtown Durham, and I'm familiar with the community and the neighborhood that TROSA is serving in Durham. And it makes me wonder if the impact that they have had in Durham would be equal to the impact that they could potentially have there at the end of Old Greensboro Road. So what I would like to suggest is, could there be data that could be submitted to the residents who are in opposition of TROSA moving into their community to show how, so that they can see with their own eyes, how the impact has gone from what it was to the contributions that it's made, and even perhaps so much to maybe some of the jobs that has been provided by the folk that have come out of the program and are clean and are working in the community, making a viable contribution. So, data doesn't lie. And I am passionate about East Winston. I grew up in East Winston and want to see it thrive. I, like Mr. McDuffie, don't want anything to happen to East Winston that would be a negative impact to that section of town. We have had enough negative impact. It's a food desert. The housing tax base has plummeted, and it's on a ventilator now trying to recover. And I have glimpses of the contribution that TROSA might be able to make, but for the folk that can't see that at this point, I would advise that you would provide the data that would change their minds.
Thank you, Mr. Hicks. Any further discussion?
Could staff give us an idea of the what the reconfigured intersection is going to look like? No, I mean, I'm not going to hold you to measurements or anything, but that's such a weird intersection as it is. I'm trying to visualize how they're going to fix it.
Let's see if this. I'll try to show you here a little bit. So this is Greensboro Road, Old Greensboro Road, and 158 Reedsville Road. Right now, if you're familiar with the intersection, so you're traveling south on Reedsville Road, it has this kind of this concrete pull-off lane that you go in and you merge in without a stop situation on Greensboro Road. And for various reasons, that's problematic. So the new alignment would bring this in using existing right-of-way. They will not need any additional right-of-way from the subject property. Bring it in and tee it in right there to Greensboro Road.
Okay.
So that's basically what they're going to do. They're also going to provide sidewalks along the frontage there. So the subject property does not have to provide sidewalks there. They provide a good network of independent sidewalks. But does that
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Real rough.
Yeah.
And I'd like to go back just to kind of hit a little bit to kind of speak to some of Mr. Bryan's comments. When we went through this text amendment process to create the use of group care facility C, I want to just speak to a little bit of the methodology that we went through. So the existing uses we had in the ordinance at that time, group care facility A and group care facility B, didn't accommodate the number of residents that TROSA needed. So that was the genesis of that, the creation of that use. And so when we looked into the UDO, group care facility B, which was the larger of the two uses at that time, was only allowed, the only district it was allowed in was GB. And so that's the rationale that we used to start to say that group care facility C made sense to allow in GB zoning. Now, what we did is we wanted to make sure that, as there's lots of GB zoning all across the city, that this use just could not spring up without notice. We, for the first time in ever putting a use into the UDO, required it to have special use zoning approval in order to establish that use for that very reason. And we went with a special use zoning so that neighbors could have an opportunity to comment, and it was not a special use permit where you were limited to findings of fact and you could not interact with elected officials. That's the reason we went with a GBS zoning. I would say to two things. One, you're right, we just did the same, we heard the same request for the same type of use last month at ARCA at the corner of University and Chatelain, and we've got the same request here. These are the least business-oriented uses. This is the least business-oriented GBS you will see. It is restricted to basically a nonprofit institutional use. Yes, there could be some accessory uses, as was mentioned earlier with the lawn care business, but this is strictly accessory. So I guess what I'm saying is I wouldn't get too hung up on just the three letters of GBS. I would focus more on the specific uses, the conditions that are tied to those uses, the site plan that restricts the usage of the property to only what is shown on there, and think about that as how that blends with and how that meshes up with what the area plan calls for. So I just wanted to give a little bit of the methodology of kind of how we got to where we got.
Of course, looking at what was allowed in the mixed use versus what we have now, and you've got hospice, you've got life care communities, you've got communities of people receiving services. So I'm having a hard time seeing that there's such a huge difference between communities of people receiving services, hospice or life care, versus this community and the services they're receiving. So the difference in the intensity of the zoning, what was the basis for that?
So the original mixed-use zoning included all those different uses that you just mentioned. What is being requested now is basically just the general business zoning for the one specific use of group care facility C. So it rules out all those other uses, and it limits and restricts the property, should this be approved, to just that one sole use and the type of treatment that's described in the definition for group care facility C.
But, I mean, we're talking a lot about who's there and stuff like that, and I wish that was off the table, because what we're really talking about is we're changing land to GB. And yep, there's a reversion clause in there if they don't do something, but, we're changing the land is what we're doing. Sometimes things don't work out, sometimes they do, but let's realize we're changing the zoning of the land.
But it's really about the permitted uses. I mean, put whatever label you want to put on it. If you took GB and eliminated every use, well, then it wouldn't feel like GB.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's really about
And
the
there
permitted
are
uses.
GB areas in town, though.
Yeah. How about it seems to me, in my mind, and I don't know, I haven't been to Durham to take a look at this, but it seems like, and I would compare this to I guess a CCRC, one of these continuing care retirement communities or something like that, where you've got a mixture of housing. I'm sorry, I apologize. It sounds like, even though there are some, well, anyway, it sounds very similar to something like that. And I know that we've got some of those types of facilities. What kind of zoning is that? Is it just a multifamily?
Well, I think they're allowed in several different uses. The use is life care community, which allows for aging in place. It allows for nursing care institutions, allows for assisted living, allows for independent living, allows for patio homes. I mean, it allows a large range of options there. Again, services provided, those kind of things. I mean, it is similar, but again, getting kind of piggyback on what Aaron said, whenever we were going through this text amendment process, the applicant for the text amendment, which is also an applicant for the rezoning, did actually want to put this use in some other zoning districts, such as IP and some other zoning districts besides just GB. But because we already had group care facility B as a use in the ordinance, and the only district it was allowed in was GB, we felt like to add another more intense district to the ordinance, but allow it in districts we didn't allow the less intense use in, was somewhat counter to general hierarchical zoning ordinances. So the solution to that was just to have it for GB, but have them go through the special use district rezoning process and analyze each site by site, and make the determination whether or not that particular site made sense in the context of what they were doing. I mean, it is only allowed in a business district, but what they're actually requesting is much more of an institutional type use, which, again, they wanted to put it in IP, wanted it to be IPS. But again, just looking at the way the ordinance was structured, we didn't feel comfortable taking that forward as a text amendment and giving our endorsement of it, looking at what we already had in the ordinance for group care facility B.
And the types of commercial uses, just talking about permitted uses, the types of permitted uses that are more commercial in nature are that would be permitted in this, if we were to approve this, versus IP would be, I guess you've got this building that is an assembly or a pick and pack, or I don't know exactly how to be used, but
right. I mean, again, just looking at it on the surface, again, that's just considered an accessory use. So there's really no commercial activity there as far as we're concerned. You can't come in and buy anything. Yeah. There are services that are provided, but it's considered accessory to that institutional use. And besides them taking care of their own lawn, they're going off-site to perform the service. So it's really, in our eyes, not really commercial.
What are the commercial uses that this board has in mind that are prohibitive, that don't feel right in the neighborhood?
GB?
Well, I mean, but GB with a limited number of permitted, I mean, like I said, calling the permitted uses down.
Well, they're only asking for one.
Right.
Now, I think we have to look at the specific use.
But your concern is
we're
the
talking
label being a
I haven't raised any concerns at this point, but if I do have a concern related to what Mr. Bryan said, And it really goes back to, we had a case which I think was, not continued. It was HBS going to HB when they're adding more uses on Country Club Road. And that's the kind of precedent that I'm worried about, because you get GB and then it's easy, GBS for only one use, but then, down the road somebody wants to change it to more intense GB.
Right.
I see that as the danger.
Right. Yep. Okay, well, I'll make a motion and to at least get it on the table.
Okay, well, first, any further discussion?
Sorry.
Mr. Grubbs, anything for you? Okay. All right, ready for a motion?
Okay, I would move approval, and the justification being that I do think and we've mentioned this before, I think we can distinguish between GB with 1 permitted use and a request for GB with 5 permitted uses. I think in the future we can very easily distinguish. So, and I do consider this very similar as far as the land use, the way the property is being used and the impact and stuff like that. I do see it very similar type of use to IP, very, very close.
I'll second that, and I tend to agree with Mr. Lamb. It is very institutional, it would appear, in its form. And there's actually a point at which some land that is zoned institutional almost touches this, but for Harvest Drive coming through there's a little corner of some, I'm assuming that's probably part of the school system's property there. So it's not like there's not institutional really on either side of it.
All right.
So.
This is a motion by Mr. Lamb and seconded by Mr. Grubbs. All those in favor?
Mr. Chairman, just a clarification that motion does include the revised condition for going from 1 year to 2 year for the reversion clause.
Yeah, it does.
Yes.
That's part of mine.
All those in favor, sign. Opposed, the same sign. All right. 4-2, it passes. Is that right? 5-2.
5.
Sorry.
I was sitting there counting again. I was like, hold on a second.
I didn't count myself.
You have to raise your hands. You can see.
I know, right?
419 more meters, you'll get it.
Lord have mercy.
Maybe.
So we are now going to docket 3409.
Yes, sir, 3409.
Yes, sir.
All right, the petitioner is Greater Tabernacle Worship Center, and the site is 1.49 acres located on the northeast corner of Old Walkertown Road and Motor Road. And the request is for special use zoning from limited industrial LI to LBS, limited business special use, again for one single use. In this instance, it's retail store. Legacy's growth management plan. The subject property is located in the yellow suburban neighborhoods growth management area. And this is the location map showing the subject property there in yellow. It's currently undeveloped. Located again on the northwestern side of Old Walkertown Road there at the intersection of Carver School Road and Motor Road. Surrounded by a limited industrial zoning on 3 sides. We have some RS9 zoning across Old Walkertown Road and across the railroad. And this is an aerial photograph showing the subject property. It's undeveloped, located at a prime intersection location there. There's a significant amount of limited industrial property that has been zoned that way for many years. Much of that is owned by the city. The rest of it is owned by the church, which is the property owner of the subject property. The petitioners are asking for an access easement across this property right here, which they've obtained approval from the property owner there. This is the area plan showing the subject property there. Again, this is a mixed-use area, about 115 acres, recommended for a wide mixture of uses, commercial and residential, to be done in a pedestrian-oriented fashion with connectivity between parcels and in a comprehensive manner. This would be the first installation of development in that area. As you may remember, several years ago, Motor Road was extended to connect with this intersection. These images are taken on site. This is looking across Old Walkertown Road into Motor Road, and the site is located right here. In your book, we did not at that time have traffic counts for Motor Road, but it is well under capacity, has ample capacity. There's about 6,000 vehicles there per day, and it can handle close to 14,000. And the same with Old Walkertown Road. Again, looking into the subject property. Looking further out, Old Walkertown Road, you have Mount Pleasant Drive located here. In the background, this is looking back towards town, southwest along Old Walkertown Road. So the site is off the image to the right. This is Mount Pleasant Drive, and then there's single-family homes further out. So this is not directly adjacent to the site. The site plan that has been submitted shows a 9,100 square foot retail store located here, shown outlined in dark coloring. Access would be over to Motor Road, as Desmond mentioned earlier, across an area, triangular area right in here. Parking located here. Again, the area plan does recommend pedestrian-oriented, pedestrian-friendly design. They did pull the building up to the street on Old Walkertown Road and have a lateral sidewalk connection there. The main entrance is there, so really a good visible feature there at this intersection. They did continue to show some parking in this area, but they agreed to some additional screening and a 36-inch tall brick knee wall to kind of screen that parking area there, so staff applauds them for that. Again, access coming off of Motor Road into the site, additional parking, dumpster, stormwater area located in here. So from a use standpoint, staff certainly is encouraging of this retail store at this location. There's a need in the area, so that's consistent with the area plan. It's consistent with the area plan in regard to the building being pulled up to the main frontage here at Old Walkertown Road. As I mentioned earlier, though, the area plan does recommend a comprehensive development type to take place in this area that allows for connectivity between adjacent properties. So staff does have two concerns about that. Specifically, the entrance on the Motor Road. It's located about 135 feet from the intersection there of Old Walkertown Road. And that's certainly suitable for a single tenant user there. Actually, it could be closer there. Further away from the intersection is always better, but this certainly meets the minimum spacing from the intersection. But again, with the area plan recommending interconnectivity between adjoining properties, and they have agreed to a stub driveway located right here to this other property, we see this as eventually having some more traffic there. We rather than a fragmented type development pattern at this key property, we really want to see it develop in a comprehensive manner, and so access is a major part of that. If you can see, it's a little bit fainted. Motor Road is a two-lane road, but at the intersection it fans out to 4 lanes. Therefore, its intersection across Lansing. So traffic, for instance, leaving the site and wanting to go southwest on Old Walkertown Road would have to go across 4 lanes of traffic here. The northbound traffic lane there, and then 3 other lanes to get to the right turn lane there at Old Walkertown Road. So that's not really an ideal situation. Again, for a single tenant user, retail store under 10,000 square feet, that's acceptable. But we would really prefer to see this move back 80 or 100 feet further away from this intersection. That number is important because it gets it back into where it's a 2-lane section instead of a 4-lane section there. The second concern of staff is that there's no connection to adjacent property to the east. Again, they're providing a stub driveway here. That is good, but there's a lot of undeveloped property over here in this area. And again, rather than a fragmented pattern where you have a driveway every 100 feet along these major roads, we really want to see interconnectivity lined up here. And remember, there's 115 acres in this whole area that's recommended for comprehensive development. So we welcome the use here. That's consistent with the plan, but we would really like to see some access to adjacent properties and this driveway worked on there. These are the building elevations showing the subject property. This would be here, Old Walkertown Road, the entrance that I mentioned earlier. And the building elevations are consistent with the retail store requirements adopted recently. Again, it's consistent with the land use recommendation of the area plan. It will provide needed convenience retail to the surrounding area and represents the first development within a larger area recommended for a mixture of uses. But again, our concerns are the driveway proximity to the location of Old Walkertown Road and Motor Road, and the lack of connectivity to the undeveloped property to the east. So staff's recommendation is for approval if those two items are addressed and the site plan does meet minimum UDO requirements.
Thank you.
Sir.
Any questions for Mr. Roberts?
How far away are we from the Box Mountain Road intersection on the northeast belt line?
I'd have to look at another
Okay,
map.
so it's not super close.
No, not
quite
super
a ways.
close.
Okay. All right. And then and it's within the means of the petitioner to, I mean, you've asked for them to, you would like to see the road, you want another 80 or 90 feet for stacking on that access.
To get that driveway further away from the intersection, yes, and we have spoken with them, and I believe they've got some comments they would like to share with you on that.
And that's going to take an acquisition?
It would require them to revise their easement agreement with the city of Winston-Salem.
Okay. It looks like it would also, their stormwater devices would need to be, it's still possible, I guess, or you wouldn't be.
It looks like, and the site plan preparer can maybe speak to that more directly, the location there really of this drive aisle lines itself up well for this connection here.
I was going to ask you.
As far as the driveway, as far as the main access to Motor Road, I mean, it looks like that they could pull it over in this area here and not have to move their pond and not have to adjust this property line.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go into a public hearing. No one has signed up, but I do think since we have an opposition, I'm going to open up for proponents first. Would anyone like to speak in support? Again, you have 12 minutes. Proponents, if you would state your name, your address, and your zip code for the record, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Michael Fox. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Tuggle Duggins in Mission, and I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina, 100 North Green Street. I also have Daniel Almazan here with me, who is a representative of the developer, and we have several members of the church board here as well who are in support. I'm going to try to be brief so they can talk more about the project. I'm going to talk more about the access and the driveway. We are, well, let me back up for a second. It took a long time and a lot of effort to get to this point. In that if you look on your staff report, I think they've done a nice job on page 6 where it says other applicable plans and planning issues of summarizing how we got here. Essentially, this was city-owned land. They worked out a deal with the church for them to construct a facility and then came back and allowed the church to sell this site to my client. And we've worked with the city to get an easement agreement, which we've got, which is for as you see in the current site plan. So there's been a lot of good work to get here this far. We are very comfortable with working with the city to adjust the entrance. We think that's doable. The main request that we would have would be that whatever we do today, hopefully you will approve it such that we don't have to come back if the city council doesn't see it exactly like we do, because we only have control over essentially a part of the deal, and we're relying upon the city council and the city attorney's office and the real estate office to say, yes, you can move that. We're willing to, and as a matter of fact, if somebody could help me with the technology, I could show you at least something we put together quickly today. Yeah, there we go. So I'm gonna contrast a little bit. This is the current site plan, and you see that entrance right there. The access point to our property, because the city owns this, will essentially remain the same. It's just going to pivot that way to get it further away from the intersection at the request of the staff, and you can see exactly what I'm saying now. The old access point goes there, it's staying the same here, and it's pivoting that way. We think that's very doable. We just need the city real estate office and the city attorney and the city council to agree to that, and they'll have to go back and revise the easement that they have given us. So we're completely willing to work with the city on that. I will tell you, and I've talked to Mr. King about this a little bit, you have the city has an avenue of being able to ensure that what we do they're happy with. They still have a driveway permit to issue, and that's a Winston-Salem driveway permit. So they have some control over this at the end. So it's not like this is the last chance. And obviously we have to go before city council to get this stuff done anyway. The church and this project have both had very strong support from the council person in that area. So we don't anticipate a problem, but we've got a very tight construction deadline, and we've got contractual obligations to Dollar General to have this store up and running in a certain period of time. And so it's important that we keep on this schedule. So that's why we ask, A, that you approve this, but B, that you also approve it in a manner that if something small gets tweaked, we don't have to come back. I wanted to speak to one other thing. Let me put this back up here on the secondary, the internal access. I understand why that's desirable in a lot of ways, and we're not necessarily opposed to it from the Dollar General perspective, and certainly that's why this access right here is certainly doable. This access over here that the staff talked about, that would go directly into the property that the church is planning on building a facility on, and they are not interested in having commercial traffic come through their facility as a pass-through, et cetera. I think, and they can speak more to it, they may have plans for a daycare, et cetera. So it's not good to have a lot of commercial traffic going through there. So we think that makes sense, and we think this one other access will be plenty of access. So we would ask for your consideration on that to approve it as that with the one access that is shown. So unless you have questions for me, I'll turn it over to Daniel and let him talk a little about the project, and then let the church members speak.
I have one question, Chairman, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
And that's the access, the alternate access towards the church's property on the northeast side. I understand what you're saying. You wouldn't necessarily want to stub into their property there, but certainly progressing along that same path and then making a hard 90 degree to the left and going to the northwest chunk of property, which would give us some interconnectivity with that rest of the remainder of that 100 and some acres would be advantageous, and you wouldn't have a problem with something like that.
Well, let me put a drawing back up, and that may explain why that might be. If I understand it, are you talking about another stub out up in here?
I'm talking about go to the end of your parking lot as far as you can to the northeast.
Right here?
And then go to the property line and take a sharp 90 degree turn. And that gives us, instead of having 50 curb cuts along Motor Road, we could end up having maybe 10 or something like that.
I get it, and Aaron can probably tell you, I don't know there's anybody in North Carolina that knows more about access than I do. I've been doing land use for 20 years. I've sat on the planning board in Greensboro. I've served 2 terms on the North Carolina State Board of Transportation. I'm currently the chairman. So I deal with access all the time from the DOT perspective and also from local municipalities. And I think it's super to have a plan and to want to have as much access as you can, but I've found that often you have to take the reality of what someone's going to do and apply that to your plan. And in this case, the church property, as I understand it, extends a great deal up there. So you would essentially be having us create a private road up alongside the church property that I don't know that it's practical. And it also would interfere with our ability to put the detention pond
I'm not
in there.
talking about anything with cost. I'm talking about an easement,
Daniel, have you guys looked at that? You want to address that? Because I'm not sure how that impacts the engineering of the pond.
Good evening. My name is Daniel Amazon with Terramore Development. I live at 306 Oak Brook Drive in Salisbury 28146. Thank you for the opportunity to address your concerns on this. Whenever staff made the recommendations, the same thing that you're pointing out, where they wanted the connectivity to the east, that we kind of ran into 2 problems. Obviously, our tenant, and we're the developer, we keep the land, but we're leasing it back to Dollar General. They've built, I'm trying to think, there are over 14,000 stores now. And so with their experience, they desperately do not like having a parking lot used as a driveway. And actually, we had a meeting earlier this year with Mayor Pro Tem Burke, along with the board members, where that we were talking about this, this recommendation to have that cross-access easement. And the board was also, and they can speak to this if I can be quickly, their concerns were that having their church plans to where that they potentially have elderly and children crossing a parking lot going to their facility, and having people use the Mount Pleasant Road as an access, as a throughway. And actually something that staff just talked about was that if there were problems with access, or it was easier to use a Mount Pleasant access through the church, they might zoom through there to use the site and zoom back instead of going through Motor Road. And so what we don't want to do, obviously Dollar General doesn't want to use parking lot as a drive-through, and the church doesn't want to use that. I've got a letter from the church confirming that, and they can obviously speak to that as well. And Mayor Pro Tem Burke also understood and agreed with that.
Yeah. Would it be possible to move the stub, because the terminus on the southeast side, I guess, of your stub, where it adjoins your parking lot, isn't changing, I don't believe.
You're talking about here.
Right.
Okay.
So it's just pivoting where it comes out on the Motor Road.
Right.
Would there be a way to slide it further to the northeast, I guess, closer to your detention pond, to where it would at least get you headed more in that direction to give you a little more connectivity to the northeast?
Yeah. Are you
and
talking
then
about?
swing it around? I realize that's going to require the city to give up a larger.
I'm just gonna I'm gonna use my finger as a pointer. Okay. So you're just talking about moving that stub closer to to their property line.
Well, I'm talking about the end of the stub that you're on right now.
Okay.
Moving its entryway into your parking lot further.
Let's see, northeast.
Yeah, to your 2 o'clock, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So back towards the southwest end of your detention pond there.
Oh, okay. So down here.
Right.
All right.
I'm just wondering if that helps get that connectivity moving towards that other side.
The one thing that I could think about long term is that if we have this connection here with the city's property, and obviously you've got the church has a campus plan that they're working on right now, and the city really hasn't made any final determination on what they want to do with their property. Having this connection here might be a great way for them to work together in their master plan, and likewise the city. And if they want to come up with sort of like an internal roadway, just depending on what type of uses, because I haven't seen, other than a conceptual drawing from staff, I haven't seen any plans. And so, us leaving that connection, and obviously we can move it farther down, within the city's property, but you're talking about having us rework our detention pond to move the connection.
No, I was not intending for it to get into your detention pond. Where I was, if you draw a line from the, I guess it would be western corner of the back of your building.
Oh, okay. All right. Western corner of the back of the building, right here.
Straight to the northwest.
All right.
It almost runs into the end of your detention pond, right?
Yeah. Here, let me put that back on here.
Okay.
It's easier to see.
Yeah.
You see where that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
We're going to be cutting into our detention.
But that's what I'm saying is if you slid that stub further that direction, it at least gives you more option to connect with the portion that I think staff's wanting you to connect to.
Okay.
But I recognize it then changes your pivot over to Motor Road to get it to swing over there. I'm just trying to come up with a way that works for staff and works for you guys.
And I was going to say we're more than happy to work with staff because this is going to take a concerted effort between all of us in order to change this access easement area and agree upon where that we put that stub, because ultimately we have to get that driveway permit from city staff. So Okay. I mean, like, I'm agreeable to working with them
Can we
however
go-
best.
So, I'm sorry.
Now, if you go back to the easement, if you just have the easement up to the edge of the site, but you don't know what's going to happen next door. That's our typical situation. We don't know what the development is going to look like.
Yeah.
If the church chooses not to connect to it, then they choose not to connect to it, and you don't have any conflict here. But if something different were to happen and that were needed, the church would still have control over what other development happens.
Yeah, I think you've got two things. I think Aaron's going to address one. That was where I was going to go with that concern. The access easement to the east through this existing parking lot. Again, I understand where the church is coming from and not wanting that to be a cut through the church parking lot or anything else. But again, let's say that they decide to sell that tract along Old Walkertown Road and bring in another request. That would set providing this easement to the eastern terminus of this parking lot would set that up for future commercial development on that tract. The ordinance that requires cross-parcel access doesn't require cross-parcel access to every use that's out there. So if they were to develop their site as a church, they would not have to connect to this. But if it were to develop as another commercial outparcel, another commercial entity, the ordinance sets it up, if they provide this easement to that eastern terminus, to allow for that cross-parcel access for future commercial development on that tract. So again, if the church retains ownership and decides to build their new facility, new sanctuary, new, whatever for their church mission, it would not necessitate them attaching on to this parcel. So therefore, that would limit that future interconnectivity, the future cut-through potential. It would only be utilized if it became commercial. And now I'll let Aaron speak to the other issue with the access easement across the city-owned property.
Yes, I just want to call the board's attention to, so remember what's before you today is what's in yellow on your site. That's 1.49 acres. That's what's covered under your special use plan and what's shown on there. The portion we're talking about for this access easement is not encumbered by a special use plan. So as we start talking about what you have to do and what you can't do, it's a little tricky because we don't have a site plan to sort of tie that to. So there may be some options to go forward. One thing I might suggest is we do probably have some opponents here.
Yeah.
We may want to hear from them, and then we can circle back at work session and talk about maybe some options if the board chooses.
Okay. You all okay with that? I do have a question, though.
Yes.
So if I look at this area, I'm thinking there's another Dollar General close by within maybe 2 miles.
Let's see. I think
Straight
it's
down
about
Carver School Road?
About 3 miles, yeah.
And then there's a Family Dollar store.
Yes.
So how does...
is your question like with one in close proximity?
Yes.
How can you do that? Okay. Whenever Dollar General looks at trade areas, and so basically their trade areas is made up of households and of course traffic counts are a component. Whenever they see a high concentration of households, then they kind of identify that this makes up a trade area that's not being serviced by the other stores. Even in that case where that you've got a Family Dollar and a Dollar General in close proximity to one another. And so in this setting, we've got enough households that meets their criteria, and they've already identified that this is where that they would like to be. I know that in a rural setting, we probably want to be 4 or 5 miles from another store, but in an urban setting like this, yeah,
Right.
I mean, like within 2 miles. In fact, sometimes you'll see them even closer, depending on. Sometimes they can be on different sides of the interstate, but they're literally 1 mile apart. But then they base it off a traffic pattern because they plan on people doing their trips in certain directions.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, we're now going to go to opposition.
If we had any time left, I think some of the members did y'all want to speak, or? Did we
I don't know.
left?
You had 5.5 minutes.
We have 5.5 minutes.
Did you want to say anything? Sorry.
Sorry.
Great evening. I am Christian Daney. I live at 1620 Cherry Blossom Lane, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 27127. and I am one of the elders at Greater Tabernacle Worship Center, and I am on the board of Greater Tabernacle Worship Center as well. We are for this. This is has been a journey that we have been on for quite some time. We are looking forward to the building of this Dollar General. We are looking forward to it for the several community meetings that we've had and talking with the community. The community members are for it. They are looking forward to this, not only looking forward to this, but they are looking forward to our plans that include a walking trail, that include our church building, that also includes some kind of like a community center, but it will be our gymnasium, so we can have some after-school activities for our youth in this area, and definitely we're going to try to have some type of baseball field or picnic area that we were talking about, as well as a prayer tower. We have great vision, and we own about 22 acres of that particular land, and we are looking to revitalize the land, and not only that, but we're looking to build, and we're thanking you for your opportunity, and we believe that this is now our time and our season, so we're ready to move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, I will now go for opposition. Again, as you come to the podium, those in opposition, state your name, address, and zip code, and you will have a total of 12 minutes.
All right, thank
My name is Gardenia Henley, and I live at 4920 Old Walkertown Road. My zip code is 27105. I am in strong opposition of having a Dollar General at this intersection, and I've listed a lot of reasons as to why, but sitting here and listening to this meeting, I'm a bit confused, because it seems like, and I don't know any other way but to be direct, so I'm going to apologize up front if I step on any toes. But it sounds like somebody has put the cart in front of the horse. And I'm also hearing, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm also hearing that someone has purchased land, made a commitment to Dollar General to build this facility, and it hasn't been voted on. And I'm hearing a lot of conversation, and I'm sitting over there and thinking, am I in the wrong meeting? Or I know I am. It's a rhetorical question. But it sounds like this has already been approved. Am I right or wrong? Since when does the planning board operate and do business like this? And I'm not saying that you are, but I'm just saying what I'm hearing and how things are working. And I have to thank Mr. King there for a comment that he made, and the chairman for a comment that you made, because one of the things that I have here is that we don't need a Dollar General in this neighborhood. We already have 3, and I would appreciate it if I wouldn't get any feedback from anyone, because this is my time now. We already have 3, and it's become a triangle. And the people who, I live in this neighborhood, I was raised up in this neighborhood. I know the neighborhood. We don't need it. This is a issue of necessity for funding. And I'm just going to put it out there straight to you. You know, and perhaps things can happen that way. That's everybody's prerogative. But please don't do it at our expense. The people who I represent, who live in the neighborhood, who actually live in the neighborhood, I'm not talking about church members who want this to happen. We don't want it, we don't need it, because we already have it. We are homeowners, and this is going to bring down the value of our property dearly. And we already have. I can walk to the other Family Dollar, Dollar General. So does that really mean that we need it? Absolutely not. Now, let me go to safety. There is a school right across the street from the proposed location, and there's a church right next to there. And there is a lot of traffic on Old Walkertown Road, and it was said that it could accommodate 14,000 more. I disagree wholly. And I don't know where the numbers came from, but I'd like to see that. And I would like for this board to closely listen to the things that I'm saying. And I'm going to repeat. I live on Old Walkertown Road. There's already a lot of traffic. Within the years that I have lived on Old Walkertown Road, I was born in the neighborhood, I've had 9 cars that flip over in my yard and become total loss. So that means there's a lot of traffic, and the traffic pattern will not accommodate a business like this. We're already trying to accommodate a gas station, and it's getting robbed all the time. And I would imagine that the same thing's going to happen to the Dollar General, but that's not my prerogative. So, I'm saying that, so there's issues with crime, and the Dollar General, in our personal view, is going to increase crime. It's going to lower the value of our property. And we're working desperately to keep our property values up. And this is not going to help us at all. You know, because some members of a particular, church or whatever want the money, want this facility to go up for whatever reason at our expense. Okay, next, I've talked about the high crime. I've talked about the accidents. Now, and I've talked about how it decreases the property value. And there's other Dollar Generals, and there's the Family Dollar, and what have you. Now, let me say something that I really want you all to take very seriously, because I'm a retired Inspector General, and I've been looking at this situation for a little while now, and it doesn't smell right to me. And I'm going to give you a few reasons why. Now, the initial funding that went for the purchase of this land was through a grant. And I know that's probably not a concern for you all, but it could be. And I'm going to tell you why. Because supposedly, this location was supposed to be for a nonprofit. Dollar General is clearly not a nonprofit organization, okay? So you need to look at that very closely, and I personally don't care. I'm just looking at the legalities of it, the ethical elements of it, and I personally don't care what council member or what person did this and looked at this and said it was okay. Now I'm asking you as a board to do the right thing and look at these things. And finally, and today I really got a grasp, and I was able to wrap my head around why. I was in a meeting with the individuals for Faith Tabernacle and for the constructors for the Dollar General, and a comment was made by one of the representatives who was speaking on Dollar General's, on Faith Tabernacle's behalf, and they said, this is a done deal, it's going to happen. This is what was said in the church. And so I was like, well, how in the world can someone say this? It hasn't been voted on by the board. It hasn't gone forth to the city council. But now today, I'm hearing real clearly more of why that comment was made. Land has been purchased, and now the property owners who purchased it from Faith Tabernacle have a deadline. Is that you all's concern? I would say no. But I'm hearing that it sort of sounds like things are being worked to meet somebody's deadline, and the board hasn't voted on it yet. That's not fair to us as property owners who don't really need this facility. How many more minutes do I have? Because I want to...
5 minutes.
About
10
5
seconds.
minutes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, since I'm the only one that's here, on this side, I'll continue on. And so now I'm putting this forward to the board, and also I want to agree with the young man here who is a representative for the planning board, because when he started out, I heard the frustration in his voice when he was talking about how things were going back and forth and back and forth. And I agreed with a lot of things that he said and a lot of things that were presented by the other gentleman in the green jacket there. And so my point is that what are you going to do when you have a situation like this? And I'm putting the planning board on notice, so to speak, saying that you really need to look at the issues here, and you really need to at least go out. You can't vote on this tonight. If you do, you're going to disappoint a lot of people, and a lot of people are looking at this tonight. And they understand exactly what I'm saying, and I'm sure you all do too. So you've got to look at how these things have transpired and what I'm saying today. And I would really pray and hope that you all would not try and vote on something that has not been properly implemented. The plan, the plan looks like work in progress, and I'm hearing a lot of commitments, verbally. But there's nothing in writing here. And I'm also saying that we, as the members of the community, we don't need it. And then I heard someone else ask on another property, what is the value of this? What value will it be to the community? None. We already have it. We already have Family Dollar, Dollar General. Like I said, we can walk to it if that's what we want to do. So is this a meeting to vote on a situation of need for finance, for funding, or is it a meeting to vote on what's needed in a community? And I think I've said enough here, and I appreciate you all giving me the opportunity to speak. I would appreciate you all looking at, the developments and the issues that I have here. And, looking at my report, I have not completed it yet, but it will be. And everything I said here, that if I've said anything that wasn't correct, then somebody can just take me to court. And that's how I operate, because I know what I'm saying is accurate and complete. So I want to thank you all for tonight. And I'm going to go back over there to my seat and see how this works out.
There's 2 minutes and 20 seconds left.
Anyone else would like to speak in opposition? All right, seeing none, I will declare the public hearing closed. Any further discussion?
Oh, I did have one question, and I meant to ask before she left.
To the opposition?
Ms. Henley.
Ms. Henley?
I apologize. No, I apologize. A couple of times you mentioned we and the neighbors. Do you have a group of people that you're representing? Or
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Were they the other
who are in opposition of putting a property owners who are in opposition of having a Dollar General in the neighborhood? It's not the right place for it either. Anytime, in my personal view, anytime you have to work with something like this, and it sounds like that, everybody's trying to make it work because it just doesn't fit, then there's a reason for that. And I would hope that you all just sit back for a moment or two and really reflect on what I'm saying and all the things that I have said, because I would not want you to vote on something and then it comes back later that, it was all so many gray areas, and now the gray areas are in black and white.
One final question, if I have about 15 seconds or so left. You were mentioning that you were concerned that the Dollar General is also in proximity to other Dollar Generals that are close by. Can you share with us or shed some feedback, shed some light on where those are?
Yeah, there's one on 311 and Carver School Road. And we're talking about another one coming on Carver School Road. They're calling it Polo Road, but it's really Carver School Road in the name check. It's one side is Carver, one side is Polo. And then there's another in Auburn Station. And actually, I can go even further. And then there was another one down Old Walkertown Road up in the 66 area. So, they're cornering the market, at our expense. And we already have a Dollar General that's at the opening of our neighborhood, and so then the value just keeps going down, down, down. And you try and sell your properties. I mean, put yourself in our shoes, and you got a Dollar General over there. It's nothing against Dollar General. I mean, don't get me wrong. It serves a purpose. But we don't want it to serve their purpose in our neighborhood and bring down our property values and cause crime to even increase. And I talked about the accidents, and the accidents are real. The accidents are real. And there's that area right up in there, and I'm sure they may not know it, if they probably don't care, because it's all about the money, and I'm saying that respectfully, but it's crime-ridden. And we're trying to work on that. We're trying to do something about that. And bringing a Dollar General in, it's just because I heard someone say that, well, it meets the standards for the income. And I'm hearing and I'm reading into a lot of things. And I'm going further on. I hope that I've answered your question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. Does anyone else have any more questions? I mentioned some things about unethical conduct and illegal conduct, and I was hoping that perhaps someone had some questions about that, but I guess not.
Let me just answer from my point of view on that. The planning board, this isn't an unusual case in terms of somebody coming to try and do something and making adjustments like that. That's pretty normal. Staff looks at it. They make their recommendations. Their recommendations is approval with these conditions, and then comes into us. So this is pretty normal. The things that you're talking about in terms of the original land use, the original intent of why that land was given to the church, we have to trust the city council to deal with those kinds of issues because they're the ones that did that kind of stuff. It wasn't the planning board. So you will have opportunity to stand in front of them and bring those kinds of issues up. We just can't. We don't have the information about it. We didn't deal with it in the first place. It isn't part of what we do, unfortunately for you. But yeah.
Yeah, point's very well taken.
Yeah, but the city council, that is their area.
Yeah, your point is very well taken, but the point that I'm making is that it may not be your area, but it should be a red flag and it should be a concern for you. And the other things that I mentioned, such as someone purchasing property and coming before the board and saying, hey, look, we're on a time frame here. We need to get this done. I mean, that doesn't sound right to me. I mean, it sounds almost like, okay, we're going to work towards your goal. And I was just thinking when I came here, when I came to speak just before and I started hearing the conversation, is this a done deal before you all even vote on it? Did something happen that I don't know about and the public don't know about?
We can appreciate you sharing that with us, but the planning board wouldn't be privy to such discussions that you may have gotten wind of before coming out and speaking with us tonight. So I think that's one of the points that he's trying to make. And if you have further concerns, that you could probably address those with the city council.
Right. But you were saying that the planning board doesn't. You were saying that. Excuse me. You were saying that the planning board is not privy to certain things, and I do understand that. I pretty much understand a bit of how the process works. But the one thing that I mentioned, and I've mentioned this, a few times now, is that someone purchases property and comes to the planning board and says, we're on a time frame here to finish this building. So it sounds like to me that you all must vote on it.
Almost every developer that comes before this board tells us that they're on a tight timeline. That's just the nature of development and construction, and they're not telling us we have to pass it because they're on a tight deadline, but they do want to make us aware of their deadline.
And then the conversation just sort of flowed back and forth in that direction.
So
thank you all
So
for.
thank you, Ms. Henley.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring
problem.
the public hearing to a close.
Move approval.
All right. Is there a second? It's
Second.
been in motion by Mr. Grubbs and seconded by Mr. Hitz. Those in favor? Any further discussion?
Comment.
Yes.
About the proposal that Ms. Smith made about putting the easement in, I think that was an excellent suggestion because, it wouldn't hurt anything. It wouldn't require them to do that unless there was a need and a commercial property came in next door, and I would hate to lose that opportunity for that connectivity. I think that is super, super important. This is the beginning of a very large mixed-use project. And looking at this map here, I don't understand, the map that was provided by the church showing where the buildings are. There seems to be quite a bit north of this site. So that's confusing me as to why, that we, that it looks to me like there could be a possibility that we could make use of that easement.
Yeah, and I probably should amend my motion to say that it was predicated on both of those conditions that staff had sort of conditioned their approval on being acceptable. So with the change in the access, now I don't know procedurally how we go about doing this so that if we approve this and there's tweaks made, we're not right back here dealing with it again.
So one of the things, neither of those two are conditions that are in the request now. So adding those conditions, the petitioner would need to be agreeable to those. And so you may want to have that conversation with the petitioner.
Okay.
Yep. And I feel the same. I think I mentioned it. We're interested in interconnectivity. We know this will be an activity center eventually. So let's.
So for the petitioner,
Well, what I was going to say is I believe on the portion of the access that's in LI, since that's general use zoning and they're requesting an S on this portion and the other is in an easement, I believe the portion that goes through the LI would be as simple as working out the amended easement with City Council if that's what City Council desires to do along with the petitioner. So, I mean, again, I think we still need to get in the back up here to discuss that. And again, just keep in mind, and this is more for the benefit of the petitioner, that the cross-parcel access requirement only comes into play on the property further to the east if that property comes in for a rezoning action that would make it commercial to commercial. There wouldn't be a requirement for the connection to institutional.
And Mr. Murphy's point, and he made that earlier, was my reason for saying I think we ought to require that condition.
All right.
Yeah, if they don't need it, then they're not going to have to use it. But you're exactly right. If development plans change, then you've got that, and it's available, and it's pretty valuable.
To put it short, if we go with that scenario, the church controls their own destiny. If they don't want a connection,
Right.
no connections had.
Exactly.
They control their own destiny.
We're not forcing them
Correct.
to connect to it.
Yep. And I think it's advantageous for the petitioner for this because if this turns into an activity center at some point, you're going to end up with a median separating those 4 lanes, and they'll end up being right-only outs. And I think that there's, it'll give them access to a larger.
And if their plans change, that connectivity may actually make their property, more marketable.
Can we hear from the
So
petitioner?
can we hear from the petitioner, please? So you've heard the conversation.
Yes. Okay.
So the question is, could you restate the question so I make sure I answer the right question?
Restate.
Yeah, we were asking if you would be amenable to an easement on the east side of the property. An access easement, correct?
And let me just sort of add to that. There's putting an easement on record, then there's actually putting asphalt in that easement. If we don't get the asphalt now, if there is a connection, that person can't come back and say, build the asphalt. So when we're talking about easement, it's really easement and pavement to property line.
Okay.
For your scenario to work.
So there's no question about the other access, or we're just talking about just the eastbound easement? Is that the only issue?
And working with city to hold the relocation
adjust
of
the
driveway.
Right, we're totally agreeable on working with the city on the relocation of the driveway. We just want to be careful that we don't end up back here if we get too specific on it and someone on city council says move it 20 feet, and we don't want to come back.
And I think what staff was saying is because the area on which your easement's going to be located is not zoned, it's still zoned LI, that wouldn't require it to come back to us.
Right.
Correct. So.
Okay, we just want to make sure.
Correct.
So we're good on that. We would prefer not to have the cross-access to the east. If you look at our site plan here, it's fairly tight with what we have to do with the detention pond up here. That's the place that we had planned to put our dumpster. You don't want to put your dumpster down here. We've already we've already tried to make that area more attractive by doing the knee wall and hiding the parking. There's not another good place to put it when you take away this here and you push the design up to the front, which we're happy to do, but it just limits us. Ultimately, I mean, who knows what's going to happen, but I mean, I have confidence in the church that, they're going to be able to do what they want to do. So I really don't think that this is going to be a long-term concern, but our site plan won't work with this, and the Dollar General folks, we would have to go back to them to see if we could get them to agree to a cross-access agreement, because as Daniel said earlier, they typically don't like their parking lot being used as a driveway. They just don't think it's safe. I mean, it causes their insurance rates to go up when, if people are trying to back out and someone's trying to drive through. So that's a difficult issue for us. We think that the site works like this. Obviously, if something happens and let's just say the Dollar General doesn't happen and the church doesn't happen, then you've probably got new owners anyway that might be looking at doing something different. So I don't think you lose that opportunity by not grabbing it here today. And I do want to just add one other thing too. We don't own this property; it's under contract, which is common in development deals. So, do you want to add anything?
The only kind of functional things that I wanted to add was that, the reason that they don't, with this design, they have to have an 18-wheeler truck service the property and be able to turn around within the property. Whenever they do that, obviously there could be implications where that you have an 18-wheeler going through a neighboring property that they, I don't know that they would intend on, but that's one thing that could be a future concern. But whenever we've got the dumpster like that, they don't want the employees having to walk across a driveway in order to dump the trash. And so, the only way that we could do a cross-access easement, to the east is that we'd have to relocate. We'd have to reconfigure the retention pond, move the dumpster over in that area because it can't be close to the building because they have to have a dump truck come and pick it up. And I know they just do it for safety issue. They, potentially if somebody did develop to the east and that would ended up being more of a driveway, then they've got the potential that their employees are walking across the parking lot to dump the trash. So, I know that they do that for preference, for safety reasons. They don't want the liability. At the end of the day, we're at the will of the planning board. All we can do is just say that this is much, much preferred that we don't. If this is the only way that we can move forward, then that's we don't have any choice. So I implore you not to require that. But again, I just hope that it's taken into consideration. Thank you.
Any comments from staff on that? As far as direction?
My notes here.
Can I just make one quick before you start?
Yes.
It's like sidewalks and it's like stub streets and it's like all these things that we spend a lot of time putting them into our design, things. And I hate to. I know we'd like to see development here. I absolutely understand that. And if this wants to be, if we want to treat this as just an independent island to itself, that will eventually, if it's successful, will eventually have a stacking problem or it'll have an access problem. It'll be a right-only out or something. Then that's fine. We can just sort of consider this as an island. It's the first piece of property that gets developed, and then we go on and take the rest of the activity center and turn it into hopefully a better interconnected activity center. But no one ever likes to have people crossing property that they own. They don't. And I know this dumpster area is large. It's a big thing, but it's probably possible to rework it to fit it on the site, and still allow interconnectivity.
This is I just want to speak a little bit to the sort of the cross-parcel access. We for a long time did not have that requirement. Then when we redid some of our parking standards several years ago, we required commercial uses. When you come in, you record cross access, so the other person comes in and it's there and there's a connection. we have seen that dynamic. I mean, just think of Haynesville Boulevard and the fact that you can go from Home Depot all the way down to probably Conn's now, and all of that is cross-access easement. I understand what these guys are saying with Dollar General. It certainly limits the potential. It's very limiting if you just have one access in and out. I guess I just wanted to call the board's attention to say that it is not uncommon, and in fact, it's an ordinance requirement. If this site were general use and there was commercial zoning next door, we'd be stubbing out to that with a cross access. So the idea of cross parcel, cross access connectivity is not uncommon. So I just wanted to kind of mention that we did make some of those changes in the ordinance several years ago.
If I could I address one thing? I think the point that Commissioner Lamb made was a good one in terms of there's a lot of moving pieces here. And, I certainly do not disagree from a planning perspective. What you're looking for is the best thing you can. You're trying to get perfection, and you have a list of 100 things that you're trying to work on. And what I would just like to point out here is you've got a lot here in that, you've got good design. You've pushed the building up to the street. That's a hallmark of, trying to have better design. We've got sidewalk access out front. We've worked with the city on the appearance and on the knee walls, on the access. If there were 100 points for effort here, there would be 100 points. And I'd just like to ask you to take that into consideration, because sometimes you can't get everything, and that one little thing is hard for us. We've done a lot of other things, and gladly, because when we come into community, we want to work with the community and make this little spot a better place and make it like your community wants it. And so I think we've evidenced a lot of effort in that, and so I'd just like you to consider that when you're considering this other part of the request.
All right, thank you so very kindly. So I think there's a motion on the floor. There was an amended motion on the floor. So will you, I think there was so much going on. We need to restate the motion, and let's see if we can carry it through. If not, we'll see where we go from there.
So my amended motion was to move approval provided that the access to Motor Road be pivoted and connectivity established via whatever staff says we need to have to connect to the east.
That's your motion now.
That's my motion now.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Grubb, seconded by Ms. Dunnigan. Any further discussion?
I see Mr. Contos back there. I want to make sure he don't have. Do we need to get any confirmation from him? I know the applicant's not agreeing to those conditions. Is that? I don't know if you need to speak to that or not, Mr. Contos.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I'm Jerry Contos, Assistant City Attorney. Given there's two ways, Mr. Grubbs, you might be able to do this. Given that the petitioner has not agreed to your second condition, you can certainly take a vote on perhaps, well, you can take a vote on the condition, the one condition that's been agreed to, and then make a recommendation to council with regard to that second condition that you would like to see.
Or I could just withdraw my motion and we could start over.
Correct.
I'm glad to just withdraw the motion and let's keep hashing this out.
Okay. I'll make a substitute.
Maybe Mr. Lamb's got something I can second like I normally do.
It's just a bargain, a grand bargain we're trying to reach. But I would move that we recommend approval and move the access on Motor Road as far north as is feasible. I would do that. That'd be my motion.
There's a motion on the floor by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second? All right, that motion does not carry.
Again, though, for your full recommendation, should you wish to, if you would like to indicate to council your position on this rezoning, should a second easement or stub occur, you're certainly welcome to do that, or you can stop where you are now. I just wanted to let you know that you do have that option to provide whatever recommendations you wish.
I didn't fully hear the developer say he couldn't handle that motion that was made by Mr. Grubbs. I mean, I heard him said if we have to live with it, we can live with it, but it isn't perfect.
And quite frankly, given that you're just an advisory board at this point, the law is crystal clear that the council would have, in order for council to approve the rezoning with that condition, petitioner must agree to it. You are in enough of a gray area here, being a planning board and just an advisory function, an advisory role, to certainly indicate your position, your preference with regard to both conditions and with regard to just the one.
Let's try this again.
So if that's the case, then we could go back to the original amended motion, since we're simply an advisory board, see if we can get that passed.
Correct.
And then it goes to council.
And at least then,
either goes or doesn't go.
Informed to know, okay, planning board would have recommended approval had.
That's what I was going to say. So Mr. Conte suggested, and that's going to be my new motion, is that we.
So you're making a motion.
I'm making a motion. Right. We're going to try this again.
All right.
Because I think this is a good thing. This is a good economic development for this portion of the city, and I don't want a dumpster to keep it from happening. So I want to move approval conditioned upon the relocation of the motor road access, as Mr. Lamb said, as far north as practical, along with a recommendation to City Council that they not approve the zoning without a eastern connectivity cross parcel be established.
Second. There's a motion on the floor by Mr. Grubbs. Has been seconded by Mr. Hicks. Those in favor? Those opposed? That is unanimous.
Take us while we got. Arnold's sitting at home laughing. He is.
Arnold's like,
Arnold's gone to bed. Yeah, Arnold's off now.
Okay.
Thank y'all for your patience and work.
Thank you.
Okay. Item B10, UDO 290. I'm going to try to be quick. We've heard this at work session. This is a UDO text amendment request out of the city attorney's office for the Community Development, Housing, and General Government Committee. The request is a text amendment to add regulations to the UDO for fences. A little bit of background. In November 2017, the city attorney was alerted to a few fence issues by some city council members. Winter and spring of 2018, the fence ordinance was drafted by the city attorney with input from staff. Spring of 2018 through the fall of 2018, the Community Development, Housing, and General Government Committee reviewed many versions of the proposed ordinance and requested changes throughout. Late last fall and early this winter, city attorney sought input from the development community and the Neighborhood Alliance. The final draft was presented to the Community Development, Housing, and General Government Committee this spring. And following the final presentation, the Community Development, Housing, and General Government Committee requested the city attorney move this forward to the Planning Board. The proposed regulations would apply to fences in the front yards on properties with a single-family, duplex, twin home, triplex, quadruplex, and or townhouse. Just note if the property is located in an H or HO district or it's designated as a local historic landmark, these regulations would not apply. Those fence requests would go to the Historic Resources Commission for their consideration. The regulations, as proposed, no fence located between the front wall of a principal structure and the street frontage of the lot that has greater than 50% opacity, should be taller than 4 feet in height. No barbed wire, razor wire, concertina wire, or similar would be allowed as a fence material. Similarly, no electric fence would be allowed. Fences cannot be made of junk, trash, debris, sheet metal, plywood, waste material, or cinder block. The finished side of the fence must face outward. Any and all masonry boundary walls built entirely of masonry are exempt, except for the cinder block as noted previously. And under this proposal, there's a 6-month amortization for fences that these regulations would render nonconforming. At the end of that 6-month period of time, the fences would need to come into compliance. This would be done on a complaint basis, but if someone complained about a fence and it was not in compliance with these regulations, they would be served a notice and would have to bring that fence into compliance. I've cut down on the number of images that we have, but I do want to just show this for the flavor of what these regulations would do. All the fences that are shown in these images would be rendered non-conforming, and after that 6-month period would be illegal if this were adopted. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. We did look at them in work session last month. But again, all the fences in these images, and these images are spread throughout the 8 wards. I had 7 pages of them before. I can't say that every ward is represented here, but in the staff report, I can guarantee you there were at least 3 pictures for every ward in your staff report in your book. But again, all these fences would be rendered illegal if this were adopted. Just a little bit about the current and proposed regulations in the ordinance and the existing process. Currently, only fences and boundary walls that are greater than 6 feet in height are required to get permits. This is a building code requirement, not a requirement of the UDO. And again, currently there are no other fence and wall regulations in the UDO. Under this proposed ordinance, there are no requirements for fences and walls to get permits, except as noted above. Again, still the building code, so that kind of bleeds into some of our staff concerns. Without a permit requirement, there are no provisions to prevent costly mistakes by private property owners installing fences in the future. On the flip side of that, if permits are required, we don't have the staffing level in the permit office and zoning field enforcement staff to both issue the permits or inspect in the field. There has been no comprehensive evaluation of all the fences in the city. Anecdotally, staff believes that the proposed regulations will end up creating countless fence violations for fences that most would consider normal or acceptable fencing. There is an exemption for mason boundary walls, regardless of height. If 4 feet in the front is the desired height, that should be the standard for all. Possible alternative, staff has not seen enough evidence to warrant a text amendment that will create so many future issues. If it is the belief that regulations must be adopted, staff would offer the following modifications: eliminate the height restriction, remove the masonry boundary wall exemption, change it to allow all existing fences and walls to become legally non-conforming, keeping in mind we have no inventory of what's out there currently, and that in conjunction with eliminating the amortization provisions. As currently constructed, staff's recommendation on this text amendment is for denial. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. I would note you do have at your place, and I don't know whether it was emailed out, the Neighborhood Alliance did send out their view of this ordinance, and they concur with staff's recommendation for denial, not seeing the impetus or the rationale behind why these regulations are needed.
Any questions for? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So we do have opposition. Is anyone in support of this? All right, seeing none, we will now go to the opposition. I have signed up Bachman.
It's Troy.
Troy Bachman. If you could state your name, your address, and your zip code.
Sure.
And you all have 12 minutes.
Sure. My name is Troy Bachman. I reside at 723 Bellevue Street, 27103. I'm here tonight representing the Realtors Association and the Home Builders Associations in Winston-Salem. And we have been the city attorney's office has worked with us and sent us the drafts and all that throughout this process. So I don't really have anything profound to say that they don't already know about and that I haven't already discussed with staff, just that we agree, the Realtors Association and the Builders Association agree with the possible problems that this could create as opposed to providing a solution to some problem, primarily with the kind of ripple effect that we don't have a database of fences, and most of the fences, at least in those pictures, kind of look like normal fences to most your average property owner. So I would just concur with the staff recommendation here and urge you to consider that ripple effect. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there any other opposition?
Yeah, somebody over there.
All right. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Raffaldini, 3309 York Road, Winston-Salem, 27106. I'm a homeowner, and I'm also been a real estate attorney for 30 years. I would agree with staff that this should not be approved. This should be denied. I think it's onerous. I think if they're legal non-conforming, to make people have to spend money and tear them down to comply, that's not fair. So I think there's some changes that should be made. A lot of people have fences that are on the side or in the front to also, not only block, but for privacy, but for their dogs, and they have to move their fences. It just seems onerous. I've talked to a few people. I myself, this would affect, so I thought I'd come down and just say, I think we should not approve this and maybe ask for some redrafting.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Raffadini. Does Ms. Henley need to state her name and address again for the record? I did not think so.
All right, thank you. I don't really know whether I am actually in opposition, but one thing I do know is that I have a fence, and I need the fence, and I don't understand the parameters surrounding what you all are saying, and I could not clearly see the pictures, but it appeared that one of them was my house. And so I'm here to see that. And like I had said earlier about the issue with Dollar General, is that someone has total lost their cars at least 9 times in my yard. And so for me, the type of fence that I have is a safety fence. I have spoken to the state, and they gave me their blessings on the fence that I have now. It's for safety. And what I basically have is a custom-made cast iron fence, and then I have boulders. I don't know if you all address that or not. We love it. Most people are saying that they like it. But for us, we like it, and also it's a safety issue. So how does my home fit into the parameters of what you are talking about? Because someone may look at it and say, well, which is the back and which is the front of the boulder? I'm just saying. We tried to put the flat side on the front, the prettiest side on the front, because we were concerned about that too, but are we going to be granddaddied in, or are we going to have to spend thousands of dollars to get a crane and a bobcat, and where are we going to put the boulders? Is the city willing to accommodate the cost for this, or?
You've brought up excellent questions. I would
thought
encourage you
so.
to come to City Council.
Y'all have really been sending me to city council tonight, and I don't have a problem with that, but for the purposes of this meeting, have you all addressed that at all? Because I need to know. I want to know. I want to leave here with a certain comfort level that I'm not going to run into problems later.
Oh.
Did I see any stone walls up there, or?
Ms. Henley, based off the address you provided earlier, we just in looking at this on Google Street View, the fence that shows up here on Google Street View would not be in violation of the ordinance.
But do you see the stones there? That might be an earlier version, because the one that
just at the base of your fence?
No, there's fence, stone, like that. And we sort of broke it up.
I don't know what the date of that picture was, but
They went up in January of this year, and as soon as we put the fence out in the stone, somebody ran right through it and flipped their truck through it. We need it for safety.
we'd have to look at it, but yes, I mean,
But that fence that you're looking at is part of what we're, so are you all referring to height? Because the fence is only 3 feet tall.
if it's taller than 4 feet in height and you can't see through it, then these regulations would say you'd have to change your fence. If you can see through your fence and you have rocks, there wouldn't be an issue. And it's no taller than 3 feet. I mean,
Yeah, you can see through it, but the rocks, of course, they're granite. So you're not going to see through those. So I have you all's blessing. What, you're saying this, so do we need a vote or?
We're getting ready to give you one.
We're getting ready to give you.
There's one coming.
Is somebody going to second this? Or now, on a serious note, I really would. Is this?
well, I mean, again, if based on the way you've described it, your fence is less than 4 feet in height, and you can see through it. The boulders in and of themselves, as long as they're on your property, wouldn't constitute a fence anyway.
No.
If they were all joined together and were joined by like concrete, however you build walls, then it would be a wall, and under the proposed ordinance, you'd still be exempt. So for your fence itself, you would be fine, but there are probably hundreds of other property owners that would be in violation of this code.
Because
they're taller than 4 feet, they're made out of solid wood, they're
Concertina wire.
yeah, made
They're
of
what?
junk.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
You're welcome. Is there anyone else in opposition? All right, seeing none, I declare the public hearing closed. I know it was discussed in the work session that we were going to think about continuing this to the May 9th session so that we can discuss alternatives in the April work session. Is that correct?
Yeah, we talked about that. I'm probably one of the main reasons why we decided to do that. I have thought a lot about it and looked a lot at fences since our work session, and I agree with the staff's recommendations for if we were to change it, those would be the parameters. I think they've identified the correct way to change it. But if we did do that, there would practically be nothing left in the ordinance. I mean, it would be nothing but materials, and that would be it. So the question is it worth it to us? Do we think, and there may even be some disagreement on that question.
Yeah.
So if it's that problematic, then maybe we ought to just have a motion on settling the matter right now. And I'm agreeable to that.
Yep,
All right. Well, would somebody like to make a motion?
I would recommend that. I would move that we recommend agreeing with staff and denying the.
Motion by Mr. Lamb,
A second.
second by Ms. Smith. Those in favor? Those opposed? Passes unanimously. All right, looking at our agenda, next item up is our staff report.
I'll be incredibly brief. We had our Beltway meeting for Walkertown on Tuesday. It went well. George, you got reappointed for your second term today at the Commissioners. Clarence, you're going Monday night to City Council. Desmond, do you want to give about a 20-second preview of next month's caseload?
Sure. We continued 3 cases today, so you'll have those 3 items, and then we have another 5 items on next month's agenda, all of which are site plans.
Thank you.
April work session is going to be busy. I'll just leave it at that. And the last thing I want to say is I want to say a big thank you to our staff. This was an incredibly complex agenda and a lot of stuff on here. As you saw some of the names in your staff reports, Amy Crum, Tiffany White, Donna Beck from our permit office. This was really a team effort. Desmond, everybody, Chris, Gary, everybody really worked incredibly hard to try to get all this stuff finalized to bring to you tonight. So I just want to say thanks to them. They are absolutely incredible. And I'm done.
Thank you to the staff. Before we leave, I do want to read something from Arnold, I guess he's
Still watching?
he's still watching.
Wow.
So he wanted me to express his appreciation to the board for your comments at the beginning of the meeting. He said everyone was much too kind and even managed to keep a straight face when making their comments. He sincerely appreciates the kind remarks, and he wants to thank everyone who stated something. With that, I'm going to pull the last Arnold, Ms.
A
Smith.
motion to adjourn.
All right. Thank you.
Get up and leave.
Thank you.
Very good job.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, sir.
Very nice.